Warning, this podcast contains scenes of explicit nonsense and lore.
Previously on the Resident Evil podcast.
You know, I'd love to meet someone who's done this on offline mode on their own, because it must be the hardest thing to do in the entire series.
I made it into the helicopter, and I was like, well, I'm ready to go, Mush. And he was like, nope.
Across all the 10 scenarios, if there is a single most awful moment, it's the Arnold sniping section.
It sounds like, Nick, really you did yourself a disservice by killing the
so.
phone, only in that it made you have to do the thing you would have done had you used the remote and blown it up anyway.
This turret just kind of pokes his head round the corner and goes, hello?
The Resident Evil Podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 102 of the Resident Evil Podcast. Waiting patiently for that Resident Evil 9 trailer. It better be in before Grand Theft Auto 6. I'm Nick, better known as Neptune. Let's see who's joining us today. He's been decrypted and is being controlled by an MO disc. It stars Tyrant. What?
What happened?
I've been decrypted by an MO disc and I'm saying hello. Keeping in character, Nick. Come on. You can do Welcome to the Family, son, but I can't do a Tyrant Raw. Come on.
He loves a good chunk of neck meat. It's Romby.
Yeah, hi.
And finally, he spends his holidays frantically searching for his family around a haunted mansion. It's George Trevor.
I am doing that. Hello, good evening. Has anyone seen them anywhere?
No. Coming up in today's podcast, in lieu of any RE announcement, which we keep thinking is going to happen, but it's not, we thought we'd take the opportunity to have an in-depth discussion on what is next for Resident Evil. This will be in two parts, looking generally at the overall gaming landscape with regards to Resident Evil, what could be next, and then we're going to delve into the lore of what could come next as well. There's lots of loose plot points we want to kind of discuss. We haven't actually done a podcast like this since, well, I would say the pilot episode in 2012, episode 0, where we kind of had a preview of the year to come. Back then, of course, we had a very good idea of what was coming in 2012. We don't really have a clue what's coming out in 2025. So it's going to be a nice contrast as we continue this year. We'll also be catching up on the news and ending with another edition of Neptune's Biohazard quiz. So let's start with the news. Put those dates in the diary, September 2026. I know, George, you're very excited about this. A new Resident Evil movie is coming out in September 2026. It was rumoured, heavily rumoured. Now it's been confirmed by Deadline and the Resident Evil main account on Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it. But the Zach Cregger's RE movie is coming, and, well, I'm sure we're all excited. I just want to start with his quote. And I think I've heard something very similar before, and see if any of you can think where this
What's coming.
So the director said, "I've been a rabid fan of these games for decades, and to be able to bring this amazing title to life is a true honor." Mm-hmm. I'm sure it is, but I think something similar was said before. Sean,
you will never ever find a bigger fan of the series than me.
That's it.
Something to that effect, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
George, we did speak about it, I think, the last podcast a little bit. But George, what about you, my friend? Are you quietly optimistic, quietly pessimistic, loudly pessimistic, or loudly optimistic?
Wow. I mean, I almost fell into a coma when you started this story. Well, I think the first question that immediately jumps to mind is, well, this is the rights are still owned by Constantine, aren't they?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like my football team that keep constantly firing managers, and you know, when the person at the very top, you know, when the very top is rotten, it doesn't matter how many managers. You know, Nick, you already know what football team I'm talking about. So that's what I'm thinking. Is you know, are they the Tottenham Hotspur of the film franchise? I don't know. Has he referenced what sort of part of the timeline Because is it going to be like a they're not going to do another Welcome to Raccoon City that covered the first two games. So where are we going with this? Is it going to be completely standalone, like a Resident Evil 7 kind of thing, where it's introduces just a new family? Do we know any details at all? But I can be quite confident. It's just, I can be optimistic.
I can, honestly, I can.
Yeah. The drugs, it's the new drugs. They're keeping me up.
Romby, what do we know? Not a lot.
We know they're shooting in. We know they're shooting in Europe. We know Sony won the bidding war for the co-production. Now, Sony previously had distributed Constantine's previous Resident Evil films, so it's unknown how much of an investment they actually put into some of the later ones, but they obviously benefited from the distribution rights. They distributed in every country except for Germany, where Constantine did its own distribution. So worldwide for all of the Anderson films and Welcome to Raccoon City as well. So them winning was probably hard fought if there was money being thrown around, but they obviously really wanted it because it was a continuation. We know shooting in Eastern Europe, which isn't too surprising. Constantine has filmed some of their other films in Germany and other parts of kind of east of there. I'm thinking maybe they could be based in Hungary at Cordia Studios. That's where Ridley Scott films a lot of his films and allows them to do it, but they could be in the Czech Republic. It could be anywhere really. Romania could be an interesting one, especially if they went down a Resident Evil Village kind of route. And Cregger's had a really good run of films. Obviously, Barbarian's been well received. It does have some elements which people have pointed out are very much like Resident Evil 7 in a few moments. He's got another film due out. He's produced a couple of films in the meantime, and they've both been pretty well received. And he's got one more directorial feature coming up before he'll have this Resident Evil film out. So we will see. He's one of those another person who's moved from comedy to horror, so you never know what you're going to expect with that as well. So yeah, for sure.
Sean's been the most consistent, I think, with the Resident Evil movie in pretty much disliking all of them.
Less animated.
What announcement or trailer, whatever, would make you sit up and go, "Oh, this might have what I want to see"? Are you hoping it will be Last of Us style in terms of quality? Do you think it's going to need that level of star power and writing, or what do you think will get you excited about this?
I don't know. Not The Last of Us though, because the difference with The Last of Us to Resident Evil is Last of Us is more inherently a cinematic project.
Yeah.
Even as a video game, it's more like an interactive movie. Albeit the gameplay is, very good, and Last of Us Part 2 is one of the best controlling sort of third-person action shooters ever. But even then, inherently, its story and its structure is very cinematic, so it lends itself very easily to a movie or a TV adaptation because the legwork's already done. Resident Evil, for the most part, is a very open-ended video game until you get to the sort of later, more corridor-like ones, if you will. But to be honest, the appointment of Zach Cregger is enough to get me on board, because I think Barbarian is one of the more sort of visually effective horrors of the last few years. I've been so tirelessly bored of the horror genre, certainly in Hollywood, for a long time, and Barbarian was one of the first projects that I actually looked at, and it was actually based on a James Gunn recommendation of all things. I saw him tweet about it. Even he said, like, I think his tweet was something like, in a landscape of like uninspiring, unoriginal horrors, Barbarian stands out. And I was like, okay, if he's saying that, I'll jump in. And Barbarian was a great movie. I thought it was really good. The only caveat I have is that Paul Anderson had a fairly decent track record before jumping into Resident Evil. He did Mortal Kombat, which still to this day is my favourite video game adaptation in terms of movies, and he did a fairly effective horror movie in Event Horizon. And then he did Soldier, which we won't really talk about very much, and then he jumped straight into Resident Evil, which just didn't work for me on any kind of level at all. And then after that became the downfall of Paul Anderson, and I really hope this isn't the downfall of Zach Cregger, because I really like his work. I'm really inspired to see his... I don't think he did. Romby, you'll help me out here. He didn't direct the movie with Sophie Thatcher and
Companion. No,
Companion. That's it, did he? Yeah,
that's a good movie too.
That. Yeah, did he just produce that?
He just produced it. Yeah, He's got one other one I think he's produced that's also due out, I think, if I remember correctly, and one directorial, as I said before.
So currently he's sitting in a really good position where he's very exciting to like horror fans and sort of very weird kind of daring IPs and things like that. And I just don't want to see Resident Evil be his downfall. Like,
no, I can understand that.
I can caveat one thing that Sean said, which is not to just to say he's not incorrect, but at least the one thing I can say about Anderson pre Resident Evil was those movies that were successful. He didn't write; he just directed.
Yes, very true. Yes,
There's an inherent difference there, slightly.
So is that Cregger writing this?
Yes, he's co-writing this.
Okay, well, that's cool. Yeah, that's really cool.
See, what might be quite interesting, because we've had that timeline already covered with Paul Anderson and with Welcome to Raccoon City, you know, the obvious, the Raccoon City outbreak and the mansion incident, and where else are we going to go? Because the other thing that they did really well, I thought, with The Last of Us was with the series, you know, each episode didn't just follow the game narrative really closely. There was a couple of episodes, the Bill and Frank one, I don't know if anyone knows, with Nick Offerman, where they just took something, just a very tiny file and a relationship that was only really alluded to in the game very, very briefly. In fact, you only met one of the two characters. I won't give any spoiler alerts, but just, you know, like effectively the equivalent of taking one of the Resident Evil files and, you know, dare I say, I don't know, you know, the George Trevor tragedy, for example, just a file that involves characters and a particularly interesting narrative, and then just completely develop that within the world of Resident Evil.
So the co-writer with Cregger is Shay Hatton, and Hatton did John Wick Chapter 3, 4, Ballerina, and he also worked on Army of the Dead for Zack Snyder. So he's had some zombie experience too.
That's good. I've always been of the view that the George Trevor storyline is what should be done in a Resident Evil movie. I happen to think it would be. They could expand it a little bit, but if they actually told that story with Spencer and Lisa and Jessica as a kind of trapped scenario, and then you expand it, you know, you could perhaps escape into the catacombs, George, or something like that, and then he comes across zombies are being tested upon and things like that. Would be a really good, almost like a prequel. That I've always felt that would be a really interesting angle. The only thing I would say. Sean's optimism, I think, is well placed, and not that I want to make excuses, but like the original Resident Evil movie, of course, never was supposed to be a Resident Evil movie. It was kind of made into one based on a pre-existing script.
Yeah, there's a bit of a I'm not going to correct that, Nick, but it's not incorrect, but it's also kind of the questions around it are a bit muddy.
Right, yeah.
It's a bit true. It's definitely true. The narrative Anderson drives is that he wanted to do Resident Evil. He'd seen the rights. He didn't know who had them. Once he found out, he approached Constantine and said, "Look, they were due for so when you license a movie, you have a certain length of time usually for your license, and you either have usually an option to renew, or you pay again." Yep. Or you let it go, or you make a negotiation around some other business deal. So Constantine had paid for so many years, probably 3 or 4 years, for the rights, and they hadn't managed to produce this movie, so they were due for a rights renewal, and Constantine was going to let it go. They were like, we've tried, we've made several attempts, and it hasn't worked out, so we're probably going to let them go. And Anderson seemed to come in at the right time and say, look, I'll do a on-spec script, and I'll organise to pay for the next rights renewal so you can get to hold on to it. And if you like my script, you can produce it. But if you don't like it, I keep the script and I can do whatever I want with it. And they went, yep, that sounds fine. Now, the question is, did he have the script already written and then he went to Constantine first, or did he go to Constantine and then wrote the script? That has never been clarified. The intent is that he wrote the script with the idea that it could be something else if they said no. But then he could have written it in advance. So then the question is, did he write a zombie script and then added the Resident Evil elements to it? Or did he write a script and then was able to do it so that he could remove those Resident Evil elements if it was left undone? That is the question. Unless Anderson ever confirms it, and he has no reason to do so and hasn't done to this day, no one from Constantine's ever going to either know or comment on it. So we'll probably never know the answer to that question. But the spec script that he wrote was called Undead. It was a zombie film, but it was the questions on how that actual process went will never be probably known.
I wonder, is it because of the relative futuristic stance taken, certainly like the musical choices and things like that, it's kind of then affected all the films going forward. So in terms of what you quote unquote traditional Resident Evil movie, we've never really had one from Anderson. Then again, not to give too many excuses, but Welcome to Raccoon City was very much a rights renewal. Let's do something in COVID. There was lots.
I
Going on. And I maintain it was decent.
Pessimistically, you could definitely say a rights renewal option, but then they also had the Netflix series, which they got paid oodles of money for, so which would have been enough to retain the rights, unless there was an agreement a feature film. It's a tough one because inherently, we've talked about this before, but the thing that probably hamstrung Welcome to Raccoon City was the fact that its budget was less than Anderson had 20 years prior, almost. Which is insane. Like, the value of inflation should have told you enough that the budget needed to go up, that the budget for that movie probably should have been closer to 50 to 55. And the fact that it did what it did with $25 million, which again was less than what Anderson had in 2001 to make his film, is insane. Like, Anderson's budget was about, we reckon, was topped out at 35. There's never been a confirmed budget, but people think it's between maybe 32-ish. And that was in 2001 dollars. So to put it into 2019 dollars, very, very different amount of money. Probably should have been a budget of probably 50 to 60 million, but for the equivalent. But obviously, under budgeted, under marketed, and it had the unfortunate thing to come out during COVID did not very much help, which obviously wasn't the plan when it was first announced. So yeah, a bit tough. I've just noticed a story. This is something I hadn't while I was double checking the rider. I've just noticed something. This is interesting. Apparently, Cregger will be paid $20 million for this film.
He will be paid
$20 million. That was for the writing and directing. So it was part of that bidding war. It's not confirmed, but that is the word, and which is impressive. And it's probably based on the fact that Barbarian did well. His next movie, which was called
Barbarian.
Yeah, his next movie called Weapons has been testing very well, and Sony probably had a screening of that before they made an agreement. Barbarian was made on a $4.5 million budget, which is just crazy. So that shows you,
they're confident, but he's basically being paid $5 million less than the last movie.
By Sony to make this thing, which is. Yeah, speaking of budgets, that's quite crazy. So Warner Brothers and New Line, or Warner Brothers specifically, because they own New Line, are the ones that are releasing Weapons. So, and that's to do with witchcraft and missing children, and he was inspired by Magnolia. So if you know, that's kind of got like inter-story narratives going on. So that'll be very interesting. The response to that will probably be what keeps the motion on this movie. But yeah, that's quite crazy. I just haven't seen that. I've not seen that news. This was. Whether or not it's confirmed, but it's rumoured, so at least he's getting a reasonably big payday, and even if it's not 20 million, I suspect it's still a reasonable amount. Based on the fact he's on a hot streak.
Fingers crossed then, ladies and gents, that we might get something decent. We'll keep an eye on it, of course. We'll end the news by heading over to Patreon and saying big thank you to our newest patrons, Ben Brooks and VJ. Thank you very much for joining. If anyone wants to find out about our Patreon, then you can head over to that. Either search for us on the platform, or you can click on the link on our website under the community tab. That does finish all the news. We'll now turn our attention to the podcast discussion. What is next for Resident Evil?
We have to go. We don't have any time to waste.
Go? Where?
Hey, it's up to us to take out Umbrella.
So, is it over?
I don't know. But if it's not, we'll stop it. Whatever it takes.
Yeah, you're damn right we will.
That's it. Umbrella's going down.
I'm sorry, Claire, but it's not over yet. There's still something we've got to do.
You mean?
Yeah, it's payback time. We've got to destroy Umbrella. Now, let's finish this once and for all.
With the whole affair gone public, the United States government issued an indefinite suspension of business decree to Umbrella. Soon its stock prices crashed, and for all intents and purposes, Umbrella was finished.
Soon, the sun will set on the age of man.
Orders, Captain.
Pick up the rest of the squad. Plot a course for BSAA Europe HQ.
So welcome one and all, and as I said earlier in the introduction, we've not done a kind of preview of the series since the pilot episode back in 2012, but as I said, the difference there, we knew what was coming. This year we do not, so fast forward into 2025, and the landscape for Biohazard is very different. So we're all going to be putting on our tin hats, and we're going to be speculating responsibly. Some caveats, just so in case anyone's worried. As you know, we never really cover the quote-unquote leaks They are notoriously unreliable, and indeed, the usual leaker has shown himself up time and time again, making so many generalizations that the team cannot possibly avoid those quote-unquote leaks as they get published everywhere by everyone. But as a result of his generalizations, they have no meaning at all. Rest assured, therefore, anyone who is hoping to avoid leaks, you can listen to this podcast safe in the knowledge that we place zero stock in any of them and will speculate without any influence of them. And secondly, we also have no insider information. Unfortunately, we're not that privy to the higher powers that be. So all our discussion tonight is pure speculation, hopes and wishes. For people that also felt that we were going to acknowledge our promise of no remake discussions, I'm afraid we're bringing that back up again. So, Sean, I hope you've got your drink at hand because remakes will inevitably be discussed.
What are you talking about? I don't know.
You've got a bit. I've bought out my Capri Sun to get me through. That will do it. Oh, they don't make an interesting noise. Capri. Never mind. Anyway.
Sean is lacking beers tonight.
Lacking beer. Well, I'm surprised. I thought we'd be prepared with beer. But never mind.
Did you not hear the ring pull on the recording?
No.
Oh, Crisp is too good. The noise suppression app for that Discord has it's too good.
Too good.
I will switch it off in a bit and open one. We're about 3 in tonight by the time we're recording.
Oh, jeepers. I've reached that point already. No, he knew what was coming.
So quite a wide, broad podcast that we're going to be looking at. So to help us, we've opened the floor up to the patrons, who obviously contribute enormously to our podcast. So we've asked them what they would like to see. So we've got a varied collection of different comments and, again, responsible speculation that we're going to be drawing upon them throughout the podcast, which hopefully represents a good demographic of the Resident Evil community and their views on the future of the series. So as a starter for 10, a comment from Craig Chilcott, and a great way to begin the discussions on this year and next. Craig says, a trailer or announcement from Capcom would make this so much easier. There's no buzz at the moment. How about a discussion on the 30th anniversary next year? Are we going to get a big year of content or another Operation Raccoon City? What would each member of the podcast want for the big 30? So I think that's quite good because that encompasses this year and kind of a little bit of next up to, I think, March, isn't it, 2020 something?
Well, technically it covers March 2026 to March 2027.
Is it 22? Okay.
Capcom always do their anniversary years, if you've seen regards both previous, like the last anniversary for Resident Evil and for Street Fighter and stuff. Anything within that 12-month period is considered part of the anniversary. Yeah.
And to follow up from that as well, patron Ferdinand van der Heek says, will there be a 30th anniversary box set like the 10th and 15th anniversary? This could give us all numerical games plus Code Veronica and Revelation 1 and 2. So I thought they were quite good general kind of discussion to get us going. We'll start with Stars Tyrant. What would you like to see as a kind of, the landscape of RE going forward, factoring in some of those suggestions we've had there?
With regards to a new title, or the next sort of big announcement, I need a new game. I need RE9. I need a Revelations 3. I need something like that. If I appreciate how lucrative the remakes have been for Capcom, and everyone knows my stance on them. As much as I am very negative toward the concept of a remake, I will sit here and admit that 2 of the last 3 remakes have been phenomenal video games. As much as I haven't wanted them, as a template for what is simply a dazzlingly good Resident Evil game, 2 and 4 are the templates of what makes a great Resident Evil game. I just wish they weren't remakes. If you were to take those ideas, those concepts, put them into a new title, I would love it. That they'd probably be 2 of my favourite games in the series. But at the minute, they're just merely very good video games. With regards to their part in the series canon, I couldn't care less, and that's what hurts my soul. That so much effort and resources have been spent on something that is frankly phenomenal as a product, but emotionally just lacks. Resident Evil 3 remake will speak not very much of. So what I'm really desiring is like all those ideas, that craft that they brought for certainly Resident Evil 4, which I think is one of the best, the 4 remake I think is one of the best video games released the last few years in terms of how well together a package that is. From, release to DLC to all the post-release support and everything. Phenomenal. I just love to see all that care and attention put toward a brand new original Resident Evil game. You know, I think a break for the series has been actually quite welcome. But if the next game that they announce is a remake, I'm going to be really, really dour. With regards to the 30th anniversary, if I talk from an unrealistic point of view, I'd like to see a Resident Evil Master Collection in the way that Konami have done. I'd like to see the classics up to a certain game, let's say, you know, Resident Evil 1 through to Code Veronica, released with all the different variations and versions available. I'd like to see, like, Wesker's Report put on there the same way the digital graphic novels were put on the Master Collection for MGS. You know, like, imagine if you could play, like, you know, Resident Evil 2, and you could choose your version. You want to choose the N64 version. I want to see the X-Files. I want the EX Battle Mode, so I'm going to choose the Dreamcast version. I want the digital galleries from the Dreamcast PC version. And then you could play, like, a Master Mode, which combines all of those into a single version of Resident Evil 2. Like, that's ridiculous, and I know that's not going to happen because they're just not going to do that. But at the very, very least, for the 30th anniversary, all I would like to see is a classic collection available for everybody, and that is Resident Evil 1 through to Code Veronica, because I'll include Code Veronica as part of that PS1 generation, in that it's a camera angle driven game before the over-the-shoulder genre took over, and Code Veronica needs to be included with, you know, that era as such. And then as a special feature, let's just have Survivor in there as well, Nick. I know you'll agree with me on that one.
Absolutely.
And let's have Gaiden in there as well.
Yes!
Let's chuck a bit of Gaiden in there. And then if you wanted my super unrealistic 30th anniversary wish list, it's Outbreak HD with full modern server support. But yeah, I suppose they're my three big ideas. So to just summarise, to make it easy for the podcast, RE9 announcement or Revelations 3, but just basically a new game, a classics collection, and just Outbreak released from its cage in some form of HD collection with modern server support. That's it.
Well,
three ideas for the 30th anniversary.
Very good, very good. I mean, regular listeners know we had a bit of a blast going back to Outbreak, even with its limitations. You know, 20 years on, it holds up in its own very special way. So I would agree. Going over to you, Rob. You know, Capcom do like to release a lot of kind of like humble bundles on network, PlayStation networks, Xbox, like that. So collating a lot of these games together isn't beyond the realms of possibility in regards to it. Whether you think that would happen in a disc. I don't know how well Metal Gear Solid Master Collection is actually done in terms
pretty
of
well.
Is it done quite okay?
Pretty well, yeah.
That's encouraging, at least. What about you then? So, what would you personally like to see before we kind of have a bigger discussion from what other people say? What would you personally like to see? Have you got tired of remakes or one more?
I mean, inherently, I think I've realised that we've got this two-stream effect of Capcom doing new game or remakes. And inherently, I think the remakes have replaced the side story stuff, because since Rev 2, we've just had remakes. So it's like they don't have the capability to have like these three lines of like main games, spin-offs, and these remakes. It's one or the other. And so I'm hoping, much like Sean, that the next game is something new, because I think we're due for it. But unfortunately, it also doesn't mean that we're not free of remakes, and I'm not sure that anyone else is saying that either. But it's just the case where that's just what Capcom's now doing, and they're both profitable lines for them. So I'm hoping and I'm expecting that the next thing will be a new game announcement, and that we'll get remake announcements during that 30th anniversary year. And that new game is probably due late in that anniversary year. If I look at like Resident Evil 4, well, the last couple of remakes and stuff, it'll be like January of 27 or something, which will technically still be during the 30th anniversary year, but it'll be late into that, just before it finishes kind of era, which is kind of when the last couple of games have kind of come out in the early part of the year. I'm not expecting a heck of a lot, to be honest. I would like to see collections, but unfortunately Resident Evil has been served poorly, I would say, historically, by collections from Capcom, and that's, I think, partly unintentional. I think it's just based on the fact that the games have been on so many platforms over so many eras and so forth. It's a bit different than when they were putting together a Street Fighter collection, and a lot of those came from like one base arcade source, and they were able to put other versions in because they were pretty similar in scope. But like Resident Evil has so many different engines, so many different permutations, that it's probably been hard. That said, I would like to see a collection that kind of was a celebration where it would be like an anniversary bundle, but it would be mostly putting together platform existing titles. So you'd be seeing a collection of all the games that you could potentially get on Xbox or PS4 or PC in bundles. So essentially that would be all the modern titles, all the remakes, and probably all the ported versions. So like the original 4, 5, and 6. On PlayStation, that means you could probably also add the director's cut as a digital download. And if they manage to get 2 and 3 up on there as well, which is always quite a possibility in the next 2 years, it might be a bundle where you get digital copy of the first 3 games, but only on PlayStation because currently it's not available on Xbox. But the rest of the bundles otherwise would be the same. You could get Remake 1, 0, Remake 2, 3, Remake 4, Original 4, 5, 6, 7, Village, Revelations, and Revelations 2 are all still playable on current generation, so, and possibly Operation Raccoon City as well. So yeah, those could be big giant bundles, but they probably won't be added value. They'll just be the games and all their DLCs in one big collection, and that's basically it. And I'm more likely to believe they'll do that, much like they did. I think they did it on the PS3. They did like a super bundle where they put all the games available on that platform into one like package you could buy digitally. I think maybe in some areas they might not do a physical version. Maybe in Japan, as they tend to do it, physical copy. But other areas, maybe not. It depends. Who knows?
I was going to say, Xbox fans are crying out for Umbrella Corps. There's no denying this.
Oh, yeah, that could also be included on the PlayStation 1, but let's just pretend that doesn't exist. There's a difference between what I hope and what I think is possible, and I think the possibility is that it's going to be a celebration and mostly talk, and forward announcements secondary, and that actual events of things being released are going to be lower on the poll, unfortunately, just again because of looking back historically at the other anniversaries, which is not what I want, but unfortunately is probably the truth. And I think Capcom would love to do more than they do because they have done this for other franchises where it's possible. So, but who knows? Maybe something's gestating in the background and all of a sudden something amazing will get announced and we'll be all shocked and surprised and happy. But yeah, that's my personal take.
Umbrella Corps 4K remaster.
Well, that's why we're here. That's why we're here. George, I want to come to you for your introduction, but I'm going to add in a comment from our Patreon Incognito tab, who comments upon the remake, and this will be our lovely segue into general remake discussion and where that might go. So Incognito tab says this: they'll probably pump out even more remakes to stall for time. It feels like we don't know what's going to happen next with the series because Capcom themselves don't know what's going to happen next. George, what's your reaction to that, and what would you like to see, this year and leading into the 30th?
I completely agree with that comment. What I want from the series, but what I expect are two universes separated by billions of light years. I don't want to be like the moody Marvin of the podcast, but it's very difficult for me to get optimistic when I feel that this series has been best served by the fans, and that Capcom have obviously unintentionally and with all good intentions, however, have driven this series just into the ground for me. I'm somebody who's coming from a perspective that I haven't particularly enjoyed many of the releases since what I think was Resident Evil Dead Aim, honestly, with the exceptions with the exceptions of 7 and Revelations 2, because it's almost a redundant argument. I'm coming from the point of view that I'm expecting this series to be survival horror, and of course that dream died many years ago, probably with Resident Evil 3.5. Having said that, I don't want to get divert this completely into a completely different company, but what Konami did, what Bloober Team did with the remake of Silent Hill 2 was incredible. We were talking about this early on, but specifically with regard to how they took a remake and almost kind of expanded on the original and connected the two, not just with little kind of Easter eggs and very, very clever cameos, but with the way that, they link the two. I just feel that, even when they've had great writers on board like Anthony Johnson for 7, just the people at the top that really are responsible for the direction of this series, I have found the writing just to be appalling, just to be a mess. We've spoken about this on individual podcasts. Village, I wasn't a particular fan of. Well, actually, no, the question is not asking me to look back. Looking forward, again, I think we have been served poorly with the anniversaries as well. I would love to see some kind of retrospective legendary edition. I mean, we've had this again with the fans, haven't we? But HD remasters, just to Sean says, just to be able to play the originals in an HD resolution on modern day consoles and PCs, and just make it accessible to the fans that have stayed with this series and all the new fans that have been brought with these remakes that I haven't been a particular fan of. They've lacked a lot of the original atmosphere for me personally. If they did produce a remake of a classic game, you know, the ones that I think really would benefit the most are just titles lost to history like Survivor and Dead Aim. I just think a remake of things like 5 or 6 would just, I think me and Sean would both be throwing ourselves off the same cliff. There's no ambition and no sort of creativity for the future in doing something like that. Look, I loved it when Capcom were the pioneers of survival horror, and everyone looked to the latest Resident Evil game to see, you know, what the series could do, what you could do with this genre. And all joking aside, look, something like Dead Aim did, I think, marry very well, you know, survival horror with a more action orientated perspective when you went into the combat. I would love to see them do and again we've already had that with 7. They teased us that they were going to go back to, you know, a lot of those survival horror signature game mechanics. You know, they tried that with 7. They didn't go forward with that with 8. So for me, I'm very pessimistic about 9 and what it's going to do. I think it's going to be something very similar on a level of Village, you know, very big, you know, putting a lot into it, trying to please everybody at once. I would like to see something that looks back at some of the classic games and provides those, like Sean and Mombi, I think, to provide those to new fans in a more accessible way, because that's the only glory. Sorry,
no, absolutely. Yeah. I kind of disagree and agree with you at the same time. So the survival horror element, I think, is an important facet that needs to be realised at all times, and I think Capcom have, I think, at times strayed away, and we saw that with perhaps 5 and 6, and then obviously we've got the kind of the soft reboot, if you like, with Revel 2 and 7. And I agree with you about Village. And I think my comment when we reviewed Village was that it was just on the precipice for me as being tolerable in terms of the survival horror with survival action. They're very quick to go that way, and there's a bit of disappointment. Where I would disagree with you is the Pioneers. I think Remake 2 is again a cornerstone of that. Of survival horror, and as Sean said, everything about it is almost fantastic. It's not necessarily what perhaps we wanted in terms of it, you know, of a remake too, but it has become the blueprint for things like Silent Hill 2 remake, Dead Aim remake, Alone in the Dark remake. So I think Capcom are still at the top of their game when it comes to game design, engine design, and being able to make something exceptional. And again, Remake 4. I mean, I've been playing Remake 4 recently, and it's a fantastic game. And I make it into a survival horror due to my general rubbish and a savage. Most people cruise through the games, but I don't know. I think it's always a tricky ground, and I do share your concern about RE9. The trajectory suggests that it's going to be very much like 5 or 6, and that worries me quite a lot if they were to do that. In terms of where I'd like to see, I'd like them to do what Sean recommended as well, with a kind of master collection. I wouldn't include Code Veronica personally. I would do 1, 2, 3, Survivor, Gaiden, Wesker Support 1. That would be Volume 1. And then Volume 2 would be Code Veronica, Survivor 2, Remake 0, Wesker Support 2, Outbreak, you know, a decent Outbreak. And then something, you know, that kind of that's how I would do it. I am in complete agreement about a 30th anniversary edition. But yeah, in terms of where I think Capcom will go next, I think they have been rocked by the hack scandal. I've absolutely no evidence of this. I think something should and would have been announced by now had that hack not happened. That's just an instinct. Please don't quote me on this. This has been without doubt the longest wait between a title coming out and no announcement. So what Remake 4 was 2023, wasn't it? June, July time, 2023, I think. And it is nearly 2 years on, and we have had no announcement of any game. I can't remember it being that long.
I was trying to think back a few days ago in preparation for this podcast, what the longest hiatus was where we had literally nothing on the horizon. I actually couldn't recall when it was, because I seem to think there's always been at least something.
Yep.
Whether it's been a CGI project, you know, or something like that. I honestly can't remember when it was. I don't think that has been anything like this before. And that's weird. I mean, Rob, you'll probably be the best
I'm just trying to think. I was thinking this as you guys are talking about it. It depends on how you caveat, because if you're using like CG elements in there, then it's probably a lot different, like CG films. But if you're talking about like pure games, like the period kind of, God, if you weren't including remakes and so forth, oh my gosh, this is really tough.
It is.
It helped that they had a pre-announced Resident Evil 5 really early. If they hadn't done that, it probably would have been probably the biggest gap.
Yes,
they did it the same year that Resident Evil 4 came out. They did that test render trailer with Chris in the outdoors, and then they didn't show anything for two and a half more years.
That came out before the PS2 port, didn't it?
Yes, yeah. It was like July of. It was like 4 or 5 months after Resident Evil 4 had launched on the GameCube, and before the PS2 version came out. Since Resident Evil 5, that's probably worth actually talking about. Since Resident Evil 5, Capcom has eared away from showing stuff too early. I think partly because they know development constantly changes, and they went through all those like things with Resident Evil 4 especially, where like they announced essentially 3 different versions, and before they finally got to the one that they got to, and they showed off 2 of those 3. And 5 obviously changed quite drastically between its test render, which was a complete pre-rendered thing, not even using the MT framework engine, that went on to be very different even as it went through, and obviously then also had some other criticism thrown at it that people still think was modified greatly because of that criticism, which the design planning and conversations with those involved seem to infer that most of that's incorrect. So they tend to now show off the games kind of like no more than probably 18 months before the final release, if within the same year. And I think this has contributed, and it's just the fact that the lead time on these games, I mean, development is taking so long. Even these remakes, like we obviously got a lot of remakes in a small amount of time when we look at it, but the development time on each of them had a lead time that we didn't know. Like we know that the Resident Evil 2 remake like inherently started pretty much straight after 2015, 2016, pretty much after Rev 2. They were already starting to look into the ideas of doing remakes and remaking 2, and then that didn't come out until 4 years later. So 3.5, 4 years later. So each of these remakes also does take a reasonable amount of time to produce. Yeah. So when you look at that, plus the length of time it is with developing a new title, and new titles go through their own development process of coming up with ideas. They might come up with about 20 or 30 ideas for all we know, that before they actually narrow them down to what they want to do and how far each of those potentially some of these might get. They might have 2 or 3 false starts. It can be a long time, and I don't think we've had a period without anything on the horizon for a long time, but people also probably need to be slightly more patient and realize that that's also the case. Capcom's also moved into a current era of development where we see cycles of development through studios where they want certain big titles out each year, but they also don't want to have too much cross-pollination of over-marketing, I guess. So right now, obviously, as people pointed out, Monster Hunter has been their big project for the start of this year, and that's the end of the financial year because obviously that ends at the end of this month. Onimusha, the new Onimusha game, is the one for early next year, so we'll see a lot more marketing and push towards that throughout this year. But they tend to like have one in the pipeline and one coming out within that year being marketed at the same time. So inherently, we should see a Resident Evil game starting to be touted going forward this year, because obviously with Onimusha being the title for January, and that's what also leads me to believe that the next Resident Evil, whatever that ends up being, will be in early 2027, because they tend to be early. Monster Hunter was early this year. Onimusha is scheduled for early next year. So I suspect whatever the next Resident Evil project will be that third item in 3 years, which will be early 2027. So that's just my guesswork on that, but it seems to line up with what Capcom's doing, and they don't tend to have more than 2 major titles, like top tier titles, announced at any one time anymore. So again, this is all just a moment in time.
It's a long wait, though, and if that's true,
that'll be the longest gap between numbered titles that will ever.
Well, it won't be the longest gap between numbered titles. We've had definitely long gaps. If you look at the difference between 6 and 7, the difference between
it's only
5.
Yeah, Rob, that's only 5 years. You're talking 6.
Yeah, but it's still only. But you also got an impact of COVID too. There's also had an impact, and the development cycles and budgets have gone up. We know this. We know things have gotten harder to produce, and more bigger teams, more the scale of definition has increased the load times on these games. And even, I mean, Nick made a joke about GTA 6, but like that thing's been years and years in development. The scope and scale of something that big.
There'll be no bigger game than GTA 6. Like it's going to be ludicrously large, that game.
Exactly, and this is what I mean. Like, any time you create something, I mean, it depends on the scope and scale as well. If they're doing something new with it, if it's a reinvention, then that also adds new development plans. Like, it's one of the things about Village we could say is that obviously not to say that there wasn't original ideas or legwork, but it very much apes the continuation of 7. So from a design style, once they've made that decision, there isn't a lot of change they need to do from a gameplay point. They're literally making a new environment, new narrative, new textures. But from a gameplay loop, there isn't too much different that they only other than finite improvements. Whereas if the next Resident Evil title becomes a much major change, if they change the dynamic, they don't create something that they've already done before, then that will obviously only add more development time. So it's just one of those things. I think this is just the modern gaming environment we live in. Like, all games take much longer than they used to produce when they're that big, and inherently that means we're getting a pushback of an extra year. Yeah, I mean, the argument also is that there was a 6-year gap between 3 and 4 if we don't count Code Veronica, as far as numbered titles.
Yeah, well, that's...
Don't you dare. Code Veronica is an all but name and numbered title. I'm not having
No, it isn't.
It's still close to 5 years too. Like, 5, this is still 5 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of main series. That's
and
still
also,
5 years.
Try being a Silent Hill fan.
5 years, yeah, good point.
Try being a Silent Hill fan if you want to wait.
But then Zero, Zero broke up.
Zero broke Zero as well. If you count Zero, numbers. I forgot about that. So like
everyone forgets about Zero. Don't worry about that.
for good reasons too.
It's just one of those tough things. I just don't think that it's an easy answer. And the question inherently is: do I expect that there's going to be a long wait between titles now? Yes. Do I expect that they're going to do remakes still? Yes. Am I expecting they're going to do side stories and spin-offs anymore? Probably not. But that's because, as I said earlier, it's the development is basically essentially two-tiered. You've got a group working on remakes and a group working on new titles probably at any one time. And I just don't think Capcom has the planned resources for a third line of... And that also comes to budgets too. Like, Rev 2 had a very low budget and it did very well. It punched well above its weight as far as I'm concerned in regards to that.
Well,
but that also meant they reused a lot of resources to do that. Like, a lot of the animations are wholesale copied from other games, other Resident Evil titles, Lost Planet, essentially, because they kept the budgets down. Textures are muddy. The quality of that game as far as gameplay is concerned is a little bit janky. We probably should admit, but it's still a good game. It's just, you can feel that, and it's more forgivable because everyone knows that the budget. So the only other question is, if we want to see more spin-offs, do we accept that maybe they'll become with lower quality? Because the bigger budget and time is put into the remakes and the new titles being made.
Just going back to what Rumby said, I just wanted to, what did you guys think about the likelihood of, doing what Konami did with, you've got Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill F both being in development, both, top tier games, and, having the resources and time not to take it in the house, both games Konami, but, to, outsource to, with Silent Hill 2 to a Bloober team. So I don't know the likelihood of Capcom, doing that. They have, in the past, had various different teams within, Studio 4 and other teams working on games parallel.
Well, it's funny you say that, George, because Neobard, who are working on Silent Hill F, did work with Capcom on Resident Evil. So, like, this has definitely happened, as you said. Like, we've also had, obviously...
Gaiden
Gaiden, our Operation Raccoon City with Slant 6. It's not that they're against it, but and obviously, even the remakes, like Capcom, essentially, outsourced most of Remake 3 to M2. There was apparently they had some work on 4, but then that went back to in-house at Capcom after the reaction to 3's remake. I mean, it's not, I think that's it. It's the question of quality and budgets over time and outsourcing. I mean, Capcom could always choose to outsource a side project to an outside development team with just Capcom management overseeing the story and production overheads. But again, I don't think it's in their interest because they know these remakes sell. They know a new game will probably sell, and those are the two tiers I think they're really focused on.
You're mentioning in terms of whether the product will be affected by the the finances, and Revelations 2 was kind of meant to be. I think at the time it was very clear that was a side project that wasn't going to have as much resources put into it. Look what we got with Revelations 2. I think a series high. And that was considered like a air quotations, budget title, wasn't it? At the time?
It was, yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, unsurprisingly, when we put the question out, remakes were brought up.
Who's this?
This is Sherry.
Okay.
So we've got a couple of comments. First one from Lee Madden, who suggests this. So the problem then, in terms of remakes, is you start remaking games that weren't classics, namely Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. What are you going to get? At best, reinventions. At worst, new games with some Easter eggs. The question is, therefore, what's the point in further remake? So he's kind of obviously quoting RE5 and 6, and he raises a very good point. 2, 3, 4 are classics. Resident Evil 5 sold very well. Resident Evil 6 eventually sold quite well. But they're not quite held in the same regard as the other game.
This is a slippery slope because I've had this exact conversation recently in regards to, like, I don't get the love for Resident Evil 6 as far as sales go, but there's obviously a lot of people out there who do enjoy it, and I've definitely seen comments. I mean, I've seen comments that are takes on those games that I'm like, not what I would have thought, but okay, I can see where you're coming from. Like, you know, there are people out there that consider them good games, maybe not classics, but still good, and I think would probably still be excited if there was a remake announced. I mean, inherently, I didn't think 3 needed any remake at all. Like 2, I was like, okay, I can understand. 4, when they announced it, I'm like, I can understand. 3, I was like, okay, yeah. But, you know, and as far as I'm concerned, 3 was a worse game. There is a remake than the original. But then, like, other people might still enjoy the gameplay loop. When you talk about the game itself, when you remove it from the remake. So inherent that question is more like, if 5 is remade or 6 is remade, are they improved versions of those games, or at least better gameplay versions? I think 6 has definitely got room for improvement. I love some of the core mechanics for, like, sliding around and stuff, but if you can make that less janky and get rid of some of the problems that game has with the everything in the kitchen sink approach, I think you could really remake that game and actually improve it quite significantly. And that's a different question than saying it's a classic. It's just like, can it be improved?
And arguably, what you'd want a remake to do, to take an older game and actually improve it. But the question is, would it get the same level of excitement because it's a Resident Evil 6? I mean, they'd have to market it quite well. And equally with 5, considering I don't, obviously Capcom didn't do this on purpose, but the optics of 5 are, I don't say problematic, but if they were to remake it, they'd have to tread very carefully again.
Yeah, 5's interesting then, because Capcom, I'm not meaning to take all the talk away from everyone else, but Capcom really didn't. I think everything they did with 5 was best intent and based on what they thought was sensible research. But unfortunately, doing the sensible research, they didn't look at the optics of what it meant to have a main male white protagonist being against all that. Yeah. I don't think it was done with ill intent. I think they had best intent, but it just backfired horribly. But admittedly, also when they faced the criticism of it, I don't think they made much in the way of changes. I think the changes that perhaps most obvious was the number of different Magini types, that there was different skins and different ethnicities that were slightly added in. But I think other than that, everything else had already been pre-planned back to 2005, 2006. And including the co-op. Co-op was one of the things that they planned right from the get-go. So it's like, it's kind of a tough thing. Like, you would probably have to, but then we could say the same thing. We're talking about Code Veronica. If they remake Code Veronica, well, how are they going to handle the Alfred Alexia thing? It's probably going to be another thing they have to think about. It's not as pervasive as everything in 5, but you could throw the same criticism at 6 when you're talking about an outbreak that's targeted in China. Like, would that fly now if they're trying to sell the game more to Chinese people and more in Asia than they did with the original, back in 2012? Like, these are all questions that have to be addressed, and maybe that's inherently where the chances to make major changes, to sweeping changes to remake, become bigger things. I mean, there are both challenges but also potentially opportunities, right? Like,
I'm going to come to you, Sean, but with another comment. This was from Turtle Talk. He says, I think the games would benefit most from a remake are Code Veronica and both Outbreak games, although Outbreak would be better as a remaster or even just a port. Capcom seems to be big into this since the poll they ran, so I have more hope these days than I would have it happening. Code Veronica is rough these days. It's also lore-rich. All those millions of people who tried RE2 Remake would probably appreciate following Claire's adventures as they did with Leon's in Resident Evil 4 Remake. He also puts in an honourable mention to Resident Evil 0, which I'll be happy to get a remake, but I don't think it needs one or will get one. I suspect the rumours are right and we'll get an RE1 remake again. And I was against this idea until I met functioning adults who hadn't even been born when Remake came out. Stop aging us! Stop aging. So, quite a lot to digest there, Sean. I know Code Veronica is one of your all-time faves, and obviously we discussed about Outbreak as well. So, put a couple of suggestions. Do you see? And of course, what I just spoke about as well is RE5 and 6.
There's no mounting of spinning or variation of the question, you are never ever going to get me to wish for a remake of an original title. Do I acknowledge that Code Veronica has its flaws as a video game? Of course I do. But you have to let that be part of its history, because as I've said before, like when we talked about Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 6, you need those steps to get to the other steps. And if you can't look back at a series timeline without revising it, without wanting aspects of it to be better, then you never have that progression of learning the journey. Without Resident Evil 7, you can't have Resident Evil 6 before it. You don't have the Capcom that learn and grew, that realised that they went too far in one direction and then gave us one of the best horror video games of all time in Resident Evil 7. If 6 had been warmly received, then 7 would have been very different. If Code Veronica wasn't the video game it was, I believe in legacy. I believe in history. So I don't want, flaws. I don't care about flaws. I embrace them. And I think part of a series' legacy and history needs to embrace them. And you all need to embrace them as well, listeners. You need to enjoy the fact that this series has had missteps to be able to get to the better ones. Because then you appreciate the better one, and all that, and it's blah blah blah. It's all stuff I've repeated before.
Yeah.
So,
one day I'll spin it, and you'll go yes.
No, I don't think I will.
It is not this day.
Because I can sit here and say that, like, I've been playing, as part of our Resident Evil 4 preparation for the 20th anniversary podcast that we're going to do later this year. I've been playing the original version of RE4 this week, and I've loved it in every way more than the remake, even though I've been sat there playing it knowing this idea is more flawed, this set piece is more flawed than the remake. The remake did this better. But because I can dial my brain back, I go, fucking hell, back in 2005, this was crazy. You know what I mean? I don't need to play an updated version of it just to appreciate it better, because I can appreciate what it did at the time back then. And I think that context is lost with a lot of our younger audience, and it's really, really sad that they, not sad in the fact that they can't appreciate it, that they will never get the opportunity to experience what, like,
at the time,
putting Resident Evil 4 or Remake into your GameCube for the first time and going, I mean, do you remember the first time you put Remake in your GameCube?
Oh,
the
yes.
2002 Remake. I mean, Jesus Christ, the mansion. You'd never seen anything like it, had you? In terms of video game visuals and stuff like that. There might have been other games doing more technical things and more, pushing 3D visuals in a different way. But in terms of the overall aesthetic, no game looked better than the remake did in 2002. Like, that was, all intents and purposes, a flawless presentation.
I'd agree. And I would also say that there does seem to be an aversion from Capcom to do remaster. I think we've only had one, really, haven't we, in RE4? I suppose. Did the RE5 technically get one? I suppose it might have done, from 720 to 1080.
I mean, they've always done some quality of life improvements with, like, FOVs and all that sort of stuff, and versions that have been re-released, and some tweaks and adjustments. But realistically, the only real one that's recently had major remastering is Dead Rising. Like, if they went down that path with, like, an Outbreak and or something, and did what they did with Dead Rising, that would be perfectly fine.
It would, because as someone who's going back and playing, I suppose Code Veronica had a bit of an HD update, I suppose, on Xbox, but
it did.
As someone who's going back playing a lot of older games at the moment, I see where people say I struggle with the old controls. I struggle a lot with the over-the-shoulder buttons now.
Nick, you struggle with all controls, let's be honest.
Well, that's true, but
I don't know.
And that's only because I find the remake at RE Engine so good. It just feels so natural. So I do get where people are coming from, but I like the idea. Again, it's all about options and choice, isn't it? So on a completely different example, you've got the Croc HD coming out, and that you can play that, apparently, according to their trailers, any way you want. Do you want to play it with the modern controls, or do you want to play it with the old controls? Do you want to play it with a CRT filter? There's about five different filters you can choose from, depending on how you want to do it. And I think those type of options really need to be pushed, because as George kind of said earlier, there's no real reason why we couldn't have an HD upscale of RE2 and 3. I just think the fans have been doing the legwork.
you look at the stuff that's been done through like so stuff like The Thing and the Tomb Raider remastered collections, where you can also kind of jump between the original graphics and the new modern versions too, which is
perfect.
Would be an interesting way to do it.
I have to caveat this though, because the thing is, we're all privileged to come from a very historical perspective, where we have seen aged gamers on here, to say lightly. So we've seen all the generations. We've been playing games since the 90s, the 80s, and stuff like that. So we've seen the progression of games. You think of a teenager now picks up a controller for the first time and plays Resident Evil 1 on the PS5 store, and they have no idea how tank controls work and things like that. And I can get it. I empathise that must feel like a totally alien concept, because at the time, in the 90s, tank controls were how you navigated a fixed camera 3D game, because we didn't know any better, because there was no other way to really interpret it to give you continuity between the camera angles and everything like that. But for modern players who have grown up on like full 3D dual analog controlling cameras, to go back to something like that, it's easy for us to go back to like that because we've been doing it for decades. It's not like if you're a movie fan and you're appreciating like older cinema, all you've got to do is just sit and watch a black and white movie. Yeah, you might find it uncomfortable, you might not find it as accessible, or watching a foreign language film and you have to sit down and watch subtitles. But at the end of the day, they're very basic systems in place that you have to apply to yourself. If it's a subtitle movie, you have to read a little bit more. If it's a black and white movie, you just have to get over the fact there's a lack of colour. But if your head literally cannot get round fixed camera controls, then I empathise. It's easy for me to say that because I grew up with them, so I can just dial my brain back. I can play it how I did back in the day. But I appreciate that, younger people who listen to the podcast, if you're out there, I get it. You maybe can't, because it's such an alien concept to you.
People are always inherently against things that have changed or go backwards, and sometimes don't realise it. Like I remember I think it was like 98, 99, 2000, games like Medal of Honor and Alien Resurrection on the PS1 had basically what we would equate as a modern dual stick movement control, because they were first person games. But yet the reviews I remember of some of those in the time were like, they're terrible, what bad ideas or something, because people were so used to the traditional and much more janky control movements of the games, not realizing that this iteration was actually going to become the standard. It's interesting. I can fully appreciate that people now will find trouble going back to it. I mean, I played. They've added the Medieval 2 just recently to the PlayStation Plus store, and I downloaded it, and dear God, I feel like I'm battling with the camera and the stick control movement all the time. And it's like, I remember playing this back in the day. I don't remember battling with it so much, but it is really janky. But it was probably good in its time. It's just that I have come to the understanding that there's better ways to involve a constantly open 3D moving camera with an environment like that in the years since that makes it feel this way, not necessarily that it was this bad back in the day. But of course, it was always probably twitchy. It just that was the norm back then. So.
Moving forward, we've had some other suggestions in terms of the future of. Yeah, I'm going to bring you in, George. Don't worry, because it covers a little bit of both. Do not panic. Do not panic. Future of spin-offs. We've already discussed some of the other games, but Ploppy, who was on the show, he speaks about this. So he says, Code Veronica definitely needs a remake. However, I don't think it will. It's like the black sheep of the series, with the game's subplot of being derogatory towards gender identity. If they did remake it, I would expect them to take out that in today's climate, and then that kind of takes away the split personality aspect of Alfred. What I'm trying to say is that I think it's messy, so I think they'll just leave Code Veronica well alone. Personally, I'd like them to go back to the Revelation series. I think they expanded the universe and gave us a glimpse of what was happening to the cast in between the mainline games. But again, I think the remakes make them more money, so it's just easier to pump them out. So, George, you were mentioning about Revelations 2 earlier. Do you see a future for Revelations, and where do you and also you can talk to us about the potential remakes of 5 Code Veronica, as Ploppy said there.
I hear this clamour for a remake for Code Veronica. I don't understand why it does. Everything that game did and how it did it and most of what it did was achieved through the classic survival horror mechanics. So a remake is not going to improve upon it or do absolutely anything. And the other purpose for remake,
strong disagree, but that's all right.
The other purpose of a remake is to make it more accessible, and the HD MT framework remaster of Code Veronica is pretty accessible out and it's out there. So for me,
strong disagree with that too.
Sorry, George. What's the purpose? Well, I divide it into remakes and remasters, and just for me, the difference in what game engines were doing in the PS1 and Nintendo 64 era, and then what they were doing when we got the remakes of Resident Evil, was huge. But the difference now with the game engines that we've got available, I just can't see how they're going to improve upon any of these classics games at all. So I've kind of lost my train of thought.
That's fine. No, it's an interesting.
I was going to just say that the reason for me that a lot of these games, because these games resonate with me on such a deeply emotional level, it's very difficult for a remake to recreate that. Unless it's bringing something new to the table. But then if it doesn't, with the this is why the remakes of 2, 3, and 4 really for me don't do a lot, because they don't really recreate that deep emotional feeling and that wonderment that you got with the originals. So why not just present those games but with a new narrative? Why just piggyback off an old narrative when I think it would have been better, the fans would have been better served with a brand new narrative using those game engines that the remakes of 2 and 3 used.
Interesting point.
Strong agree with that one, GT.
Interesting point, GT, because there's another comment from Elsie Hoffman who says this: I enjoy the remakes for what they are, and even enjoyed Remake 4 more than the original. I'd love to see a remake of Outbreak or Code Veronica. However, there were so many missed opportunities and missteps with previous remakes that I don't have much faith with the future remakes won't repeat the same mistakes. RE2 Remake should have expanded the zapping system and distinguished the B scenarios, for example. Remake 4 was great, with only minor complaints, mostly Krauser story rewrites. But is that because of it is more popular game and received extra care and attention because they learnt from their past mistakes? So I guess I'd be more excited for a continuation of the Revelation series, new spin-offs or games that fill in the gaps in the timeline, or a new game that actually seeks to tie up the loose ends and we'll come to the loose ends later. But that was interesting that what Elsie's kind of suggesting is that the complaints are quite minimal, but at the same time, there's no expansion. They're saying they could have expanded the zapping system, could have made the B scenarios more, arguably more tangible and improved upon what was there. And I think even though I prefer Remake 4, it doesn't expand apart from the Amber plotline, which is barely. You could take the Amber out and replace it with the dominant Plaga, and it's basically the same storyline. There is no expansion. Now, is that a prerequisite of a remake? I don't know, but obviously with the Remake 1, we did get that significant expansion of the lore that perhaps even 2, 3, and 4 certainly were lacking. But I don't know if anyone want to comment on that quickly before we move on to.
This is where, I'll use Code Veronica as an example because GT, like I said to GT, I disagree. Like, there are definitely elements of Code Veronica that I think, from a gameplay perspective, could definitely be improved. But then I wouldn't want them to drastically change the lore and narrative because there is a lot of plot-heavy stuff. And if anything, I would like to see them expand. But exactly as those comments said, it's like the handling of some of the narrative contractions, I guess, that is for better lack of term, were made for 2, especially, does put some pause to how much that would be expanded. Like, the thing is, Capcom has access, say, to original design documents or design plans, perhaps, of these games. And so we know from some of the stuff that's been shared about Code Veronica, there was original plan to have a much more open bit of the island. There was some stuff to do with Rodrigo and his village and his family that were on the island originally before Umbrella took over. These are all potential opportunities to expand narratively on Code Veronica that doesn't change the main narrative, but kind of makes it even bigger than it was originally. That did exist in original design documents, but whether or not they would go down that path, should they make a Code Veronica remake? Then also there's a design, like there's a lot of backtracking in Code Veronica that maybe they would want to streamline instead of making but they instead open up more expansion of the hub areas. So like the prison might become more expansive with more in it. So while you don't have to backtrack as much, you do get to explore more of it or see more of the island, or the trek between different parts of the islands become longer because they want to expand those out and make the island feel bigger. There's all these different elements, right? This is where I make the strong disagree point, is that there's always opportunity for to improve things. Whether or not it does is the question, though. That's where I was coming from in theory,
No,
and it kind of answers the question as well. The only other thing I'm going to say because I'm talking far too much, is I kind of earlier answered what I think is the problem with the spin-offs, is that inherently there's the budget, there's the production timelines, and obviously the success of the remakes selling that kind of infuses the idea that they will just make new games and remakes for the time being. I think also the other element to that is risk. And that's probably the biggest drawer of like the remakes for them, is that there's a certain built-in audience, and this kind of also answers the question about 5 and 6 a little bit. They may not be considered classic games, but at least they're known quantities. So when you're going to make some changes to them, people know kind of what they're getting into when it comes to a remake, and they're excited about something that's newer than perhaps other certain remakes or spin-offs, which tend to have a lot of question marks, especially when it comes to budget and concept. Like, you could easily believe, I think we all agree that Rev 2 was really good, but you could also believe that if it had been handled poorly, it could have just been another bad spin-off as well. And so people inherently will be on the fence. And I think Revelations, it came out on like 6 or 7 platforms overall in its entire life, 5 at launch. I don't know how overall successful it was compared to, say, a remake. As far as sales, it definitely wasn't going to get Remake 3, Remake 2, or Remake 4 levels of success. So from Capcom's business sense, even if it's a lower budget, it has much more greater risks of sales than perhaps something with a non-quantity or a full budget, very well marketed sequel is going to have. So yeah, bit of a tough one.
It is. Let's move on then to the kind of future. So and this is going to lead into our lore discussion as well. So Kiadi Mundi says, as for the main series' next game, I'm fully expecting something unique, not necessarily all that connected to what came before lore-wise. To a certain point, I believe in another Resident Evil homage to some classic horror, so replicating like the foundations of RE7 and RE8 in terms of using well-known horror tropes and then building upon it, but doesn't expect it necessarily to be connected lore-wise. That does bring us quite nicely onto the lore discussion, and we're going to spend the next half of the podcast looking into potential loose ends and where people want the next game to go, assuming the chronological game, say. So we can bring an end to the remake discussion for the time being. So Sean, you can relax. And we can look at what our patrons have said about that and what people want for Resident Evil 9. Insert. There's a couple of loose plot points to go with throughout the series, in fact. I'm going to start with from Doom GC, who says, my dream for Resident Evil 9 would be to continue with the Rogue Hound Wolf Squad and conclude the Mold trilogy, but at the same time set up what's going to come next. Have Jill in the squad for her final operation, and he's hoping hard for that one. And my beloved Carlos for his retribution closure. Bring Blue Umbrella on the forefront of the narrative, and for God's sake, don't kill the new villain right away. We've discussed that quite a bit. Capcom do have a very big villain problem, stretching back to the end of Wesker and RE5. But I suppose that leads nicely then into what Doom wants a direct continuation, essentially, sounds like, of the finale of Resident Evil Village, with Chris doing the sort of let's take down Umbrella, let's take down the BSAA.
Captain, you need to see this. BSAA didn't send soldiers. This is a bioweapon.
What the hell were they thinking?
Orders, Captain.
Pick up the rest of the squad. Plot a course for BSAA Europe HQ. Someone's got to pay.
Where do you see? I know Batman, sadly not here. He was always of the view that storyline should be concluded in a CGI film rather than a game, due to the almost inevitable action-heavy intimation that would bring. George, start with you then. Do you want to see the cliffhanger end, well, the cliffhanger ending, but the ending of Village followed up in 9, or do you think, as kind of Kiani Mundi suggested, that actually it's going to be very disconnected from it and a bit like what we've seen in the past?
Well, I loved what they did with 7, and I know it was very controversial, completely. Well, we thought until the very end, taking it completely outside of Umbrella and having this kind of, brand new narrative. These are beloved characters. I adore them, but I am absolutely bored to tears now. And this is because of the writing and what Capcom have been doing with them. Look, I fucking adore Resident Evil 0 because of the way that it plays, the atmosphere, everything I love about Remake. I get from 0. And absolutely despise Resident Evil Call of Duty, Resident Evil 5. But the narrative of 5 was fantastic. And we were talking earlier about the trailer for 28 Years Later and that, that English countryside. And I've always been a big fan of the Hammer House of Horror era of horror films, that very kind of bleak, English, horror, as we, towns up north, the set in the 1950s and the moors that you get at the beginning of American Werewolf in London and all of that sort of stuff. And I would love to see a Resident Evil presented in that way. And I think about Brandon Bailey, going back to why I mentioned Resident Evil 5. Whilst I can't stand the gameplay, it had one of its narrative is a series highlight. Wonderful what it does, everything that 0 should have done narratively. And quite rightly so, does get a kicking, even though I adore it. This is what 5 did. And so I would like to see, the series does have such a rich history, but we have to, and yeah, I'd like to see some stuff maybe with the Brandon Bailey, the trading. Let's investigate some of the stuff that was going on early on, the political intrigue and battles between Spencer and Marcus and yeah. So I think going back to some early series roots and setting it, perhaps over here.
Not a direct continuation.
I'm bored
of
to
Hound
tears. I can't know. If you want to take that series forward with the CGI films, like we tried to do with Heavenly Island.
That's right. So you kind of agree with Batman on that point. Then just you would think RE9 perhaps in some way narratively connected, but in terms of the setting, completely different place. Which would almost be like what's the difference between 7, 8, and 9? Or sorry, 7 and 8. In that, yes, there's threads between 7 and 8. But realistically, they're completely separate. That kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, I just look. It's difficult for me to go down that route because I'm just so disconnected from the narrative of Village, and I can't see what else. They brought the Winters family narrative to an end, didn't they? So
do you think they have? I don't think they have.
Oh God!
See, I'm quite in favour of one more. I like the idea of
really.
I like the idea of trilogy. And although Ethan's story is finished, and I think they did that quite conclusively, I think we could get a Mia.
I actually find there's just so much more interest and intrigue in the early development of Umbrella and the characters involved in that early era and perhaps how.
But you could have that. But any new storyline is going to be set in the future. That I don't think that's even debatable. I think the next game will be because they're all set in 2026.
I think 6. I don't know. For me, 6 almost proved that there's no. You take this series and you take it out into the world, and for me, it just kind of loses its interest. That's why I kind of enjoyed 7 and the earlier games where we had these more localized. Even though yes. It was 2 and 3 was kind of a city outbreak. We actually got the individual sort of little story just within actually a small location of the geography of Raccoon City with Jill and Leon and Claire. So I'd just like to see a more localized story, more minimalist.
Okay.
And channeling those early game mechanics that we have now seen with the remake. I'm sure to go back to it again with the Silent Hill remake, that there is a market and audience for it that will embrace these really,
but you've seen it as well with Remake 2. I think that's the point because it shows you how it works.
But I don't really agree because the whole game mechanic that they, the whole way that was presented for me, the whole palette of the game.
In a new game, that's what I'm saying. In a new game, yes, fine. If the remake elements don't work for you in RE2 remake, that's fine. But you could easily put a brand new game into that engine with that, and see how it goes. Sean, what about you? Where do you see on continuation of Hound Wolf Squad, or do you like George's? I suspect George is probably right. It's going to be a loosely connected sequel set in a completely new environment with new, perhaps some new characters.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer this, because at the risk of contradicting myself, like, you pursue the Chris going to BSAA HQ, dealing with the bio weapon terror that they've clearly unleashed upon the world in Village with cloned soldiers or whatever, surely is only going to lead to a very action-packed video game of which we don't want the series to go down again. So we're in a catch-22 situation where, like, I don't necessarily want to see Resident Evil 9 like that. But then if they don't pursue that, then we're being, God, forgive the crudeness, but blue-balled again with the fact that, we're right back where we were with the original RE trilogy, where we promised about a takedown of Umbrella that the, subsequent game that deals with it doesn't show us. The last thing and we've all joked about it, the last thing we want is an RE9 to start with a narration from Chris Redfield going, BSAA stock prices crashed. And the thing is, if you spin off that conflict into a CGI movie, then if you're just sticking to a gameplay, gaming playthrough, then that's all you're going to get. If RE9 is so disconnected, that's an entirely new idea whatsoever, then the cliffhanger of Village won't work on a video game basis. So we're right back where we were with the RE trilogy and RE4. We're not getting that natural continuation between games, and that's always been the biggest problem with these games, is that you buy a brand new Resident Evil game, you go ahead and you finish it, and the ending of that game, any potential sort of post-credit scene or anything like that, is never followed up on. I saw only people on socials this week were listing the untold plot threads, the unfinished plot threads of RE games, and you've got Raymond and Jessica from Revelations, you've got Natalex from Revelations 2, you've got the weird RE3 remake ending where, what we assume is Jill grabs the broken, antivirus vial. So if
Ada's mystery, Ada's still a mystery.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you jump into RE9 and it's an entirely new spin on the formula, then that's another ending in Village that we have, been gamers not been privy to seeing.
No, you're right. Obviously, famously, the Umbrella missile in RE4, but it's happened again with Tricell. If you look at Degeneration, kind of had, I know it's a slightly different order, but Degeneration kind of led on with the Tricell getting the G virus. Tricell were killed off again off screen. But it is popular. This is what I'm saying. This is popular. A lot. We've had more comments about the follow-up for the Hound Wolf Squad and Village. So from Nikita Mason, a continuation from Village, and I'll bring Rob into this. A continuation from Village.
How could you not mention Fong Ling and Bruce
Fong-
McGibbon?
well,
Don't you want to know what happened on that inflatable?
He was keeping the American end up. Absolutely.
I want to know what happened there. Sorry.
So Nikita Mason
now,
says,
George, when a man and a woman.
all I know is that wasn't in Bruce's dossier.
So Nikita Mason
I'm just
says,
loving all this attention that Dead Aim's getting.
A continuation from Village with the BSAA storyline, I feel like is a must for RE9, but I don't really have any ideas that would work. Interesting, because obviously we're just talking about that. I want more Resident Evil, but honestly, I just don't know what they could do that wouldn't feel something like they've done before. But I'd love for Jill to return again. She's my fave, and I feel like Chris gets too much attention compared to the rest of the OG cast. Walk Different agrees and says, I would like to see a continuation from the end of 8. Some of the old guard need to move on, as George mentioned there, as well, I feel. Not completely, but introduce new protagonists to carry the series forward over the next 3 years. And Anthony McCardle also agrees, saying, if RE9 was a direct continuation to finish off the Mold saga with Chris, having Mia as the main antagonist would have been brilliant. Yes, I agree. Having her in 2 games as a damsel in distress with a dark background to end up being the main bad guy would have worked well. Well, would work well in my opinion.
I think she should be fully playable. Let's go for it.
Yeah, that would be interesting. The big
you were hinted at it in 7 because obviously you got the playable Mia section. Yeah. So let's have a fully playable.
And this goes to the heart of what you said earlier about the all action. Sorry, Rob, I was going to bring you in. I apologise. The all action outbreak, if you like, against the BSAA. It's very hard to justify why Chris, knowing what he knows with his team, would suddenly go in and only have a pistol. In the games, in RE1, you could go, well, they won't really know what they're doing. Leon only has that. Claire has to find things. Leon went in wasn't expecting Ganados. The more these people are involved in biohazard incidents, the harder it is to justify why they wouldn't come in armed with a bloody rocket launcher, because they know what they're going to come up against. So in order to have that exploratory feel and, be able to pick up weapons on the go, you either need to be pretty stupid or be a civilian, which is why I think why Ethan worked quite well, going back to that element, and obviously something Silent Hill does quite frequently. So yes, I think having Mia on board, she acts in that civilian role. I only have a gun. She wouldn't have access necessarily to high-powered weapons. Rob, what's your opinion on those comments there from the patrons?
Inherently, it's a tough one. I kind of agree with the idea that it's not there's no obvious answer as to where the franchise is going next, because much like there's a conflict, for lack of a better term, between you and George talking about whether or not you would want to follow up of the Winters story or not. Like, that's probably one of the problems inherently right now. It's like, where do you go forward? And also that same thing about, do you bring in classic characters or do you establish new ones is another question.
Yeah.
The me sitting on the fence answer is, why not both? I know that sounds kind of crazy, but why not establish a game that looks like it's going to be about legacy characters and something seemingly unrelated, only for it to basically sideline you with the idea that something comes in that connects these things together with something new. And inherently, you get to answer all these questions in one, where you can market it like it's a new adventure of old characters, only for it to actually connect up to something unexpected, which answers other outstanding questions and brings these together. And there's always that opportunity to turn, as you said, turn someone into an actual full-blown villain, or for something unconnected to come in. The problem always inherent with this is that when they are trilogies, it's a much easier through line to market it as such. It would be like them all of a sudden bringing up the ending of, say, Revelations 2 in a mainline game. And for the people who haven't played Revelations 2, they would just be like, what the hell is this all about? You have to kind of do a bit of weighted backstory and explain it. So bringing back established characters is a nice, I don't want to say shortcut, but it's a much easier way to kind of establish a continuity of events, which again, if you set it up that way and then bring in other elements from other games which you can explain through narrative explanations or character interactions, would be a much easier way to do it. So I don't know, it's tough. I agree, there's no obvious answer as far as I'm concerned. And from wanting to see, there are things I want to see resolved. Obviously, I do want to see the resolution of why it was left at the end of Village, and much like I just made the comment about Revelations 2, it would be nice to see that picked up somehow down the track, but the chances of that happening anytime soon, probably next to nothing, if at all, which is unfortunate. But would I like to see new characters? Yeah, of course, especially in the timeline. A lot of these characters are getting much older now, to the point where you start going, how can they continue to drag themselves into the fight? I mean, that's already been a question of itself for Chris as well. How much longer can you keep doing this thing? And also the narrative conceit of bringing in some of these characters where they're not also fighters, where you're not going to get a Claire into the involvement very easily these days, because that's not her thing. And when they've done it in, say, Revelations 2, it's just been basically a repeat of Code Veronica. She ended up back in another prison on an island. So
Death Island to me felt very forced as to why they were all together.
Yeah. So these also become slightly problematic as far as narratives are concerned, which makes it harder to also finalize existing stories and to create new ones, as to you have to also explain why they'd even be involved in the first place, or get involved, or get dragged into it. So it's easier with certain characters. That's probably one of the reasons why Chris and Leon, for example, get used a lot, and to some degree Jill, but not as much, is because they're still in the fight. They're still working for agencies or people or organizations or situations that will naturally allow them to be dragged in because they want to do the right thing, or they've been ordered to do the right thing, or whatever it has been. Whereas, getting certain characters back in, that was probably my biggest disbelief with Death Island, for example, is that Jill, aside from the fact that obviously there were complaints about how she barely had changed at all, was also the fact that she's so readily available back into the fight. Whereas after everything had gone through, I think a lot of agencies probably would have said, right, you're just a desk agent now. We can't be putting you back on the field. We can't trust everything that's happened to you, even though there'll be psychological tests, and there'll be just the risk of PTSD and other elements going on in that would basically mean that I wouldn't see her ever firing a gun ever again. And in a real world scenario, yet Death Island put it back out essentially in the field. So there's a certain leeway with movie/game concepts where you can just trust that they've made a decision on these things that forward the plot, so you kind of just accept it, but that don't that would fly in the face of real world. But I'm going on a massive tangent away from
No,
where
it's...
my point is here. But the thing is, it is not an easy answer, and I think that may also lead to the whole thing we were talking about before with how long it's been between mainline titles. And we know Village wasn't even started as a mainline title; it was at least at one point a spin-off back when they thought that was going to be the case against the remakes. So things expand and change, but I can imagine that that's probably been one of the biggest decisions: is who are the main characters, who are the main antagonists, what is the narrative going forward? Do we pick up threads or start new ones? Like, I suspect this was probably a good year's worth of pre-planning in the discussion just in its first early development alone, trying to figure out what that narrative is going to be.
You'd hope so. Death the Pursuer kind of summarised what we thought, actually, so we probably actually inadvertently discussed him. Death said, one thought I've had would to avoid a potential RE4-like off-screen event, as well as another RE6, is to make the continuation of Village the siege on the BSAA HQ into another Sky film, and by the end you could accomplish what should have been done at the end of RE6, tie up the stories of some of the old guard directly involved and bring in new, or in this case returning protags for the next main entry. So yeah, we've kind of discussed that already as a potential option. Anthony McCardle also comments, he goes, I'd like to see a dedicated team and director put in place. And from the outline, they know what they're working on, potential 3 games into the future. Can't see that happening these days, but you never know. And they're given the opportunity to write cohesive storylines between titles. And then Doom GC also says, going off what you there said, Rob, there needs to be a solid main antagonist, and they need to address the main cast getting really old for their line of work. Which is true. That I see loads of things on social media about how old the cast are at this point in time.
Yeah, or at least as the narrative had been put forward, because obviously there's that jump in time at the end of Village.
Yeah.
So that's another element. The other thing about that is that the antagonist thing is an entirely different angle that we haven't really dug into. But like we've all established in previous episodes that post Wesker's demise in RE5, there really hasn't been a strong continual antagonist. There's been elements of an idea, obviously, of like this resurrected umbrella and so forth. But as far as like enemies become, they essentially are a monster of the week concept.
Mm-hmm.
The villain appears in the game, they essentially turn into something and then they get killed, and that's been pretty much the consistency, with the exception of Alex Wesker, and even she did do that, but they just found a way to continue her on in another form beyond the end of that game, which again is an unanswered plot thread. So that doesn't also bode well, unfortunately.
I want to conclude the lore discussions because we've got some alternative options which are really interesting, and then I want to focus on perhaps some of the other untouched lore issues like the Raymond Jessica storyline. So Ben Brooks says, for the main series, I think they should start killing or retiring some of the main characters as they're aging and introduce. See what you think of this, chaps. Like introduce like another one of the Spencer's children that's more powerful than Wesker, that's been pulling the strings for a while. Somehow Wesker has returned.
Derek.
There's another suggestion as well, which I really want George's comments on. But what about that? Do you think they'll pull another Wesker, or just they'll bring back Albert? I think they might. Well, I don't want to say what I think, but anyone see that happening? Bringing back a Wesker? If RE9 is Chris's final showdown, do you think they won't resist having a Wesker in there of some description?
But then, if there's no history, relationship history, what's the point other than just in a name? I mean, that's why Jake Wesker left me rather cold as well, but even more so. I mean, it's unfortunate, it's been said before, Alex Wesker, wonderful antagonist, such a shame. Well, I'm bringing Wesker back. I mean, it would only be, if they did, would the way with which they did it, would that narrative be any more ridiculous than Mother Miranda wandering into a cave and coming across what she did? And they've done more fantastical and more ridiculous
they have
hate things, and I think they will. I think I don't know anything about these spoilers. I don't know if it this hack, whether it was in that, but and what you mentioned something else. I don't think
I was just going to say the only additional point for me is that I would rather see them write a new antagonist who's a strongly written character that could be established as a new ongoing bad, bringing back an existing one, or just bringing another Wesker into the fold, or resurrecting Wesker, because inherently they already come with weak points attached. Whereas, yes, it'll be hard to establish a new villain, but if you do it if you research it right and do it correctly and establish them for at least an arc or a concept where they're going to be here for a little while, then at least it adds stakes and at least adds interest and at least it adds foreshadowing for more future events. And especially if they're left in the shadows a little bit to the protagonists at the start, that they're essentially manipulating things and it's very vaguely hinted at from their perspective, but from us as an audience perspective, we get a better understanding. I mean, that's one of the things that's become, I guess, with Seven, especially when you put all the viewpoint into the main character, we've gone away from this idea of being able to show events that are going on around those characters that aren't involving those characters. So if you think of something like Resident Evil Zero, where we get these cutscenes showing, Wesker talking to Birkin and stuff that's completely unrelated to what Billy and Rebecca are doing in that game, but it's still connect to the events because they're being monitored. We don't do that so much in games these days, and overall, including Resident Evil, where it's a much more singular narrative of like explaining just from the events of what's going on from those characters' perspective only, because that's inherently built into the gameplay loop too. So maybe going back to that sort of style, we saw little bits of that, a little and somewhat even in Village, but again, mostly from the perspective of Ethan again.
Just think if they kept Alex Wesker, it's 10 years since Revelations 2, but of course she was introduced in by name earlier, would have quite, there'll be 10 years of potential going up to 9 now. That, and I think people would have been quite invested in that if she had been the main bad in 6, maybe 7 somehow.
Even if she hadn't been essentially, for lack of a term, killed off in Revelations 2, if she had managed to do her thing and she was part of the plot and she escaped, at least narratively, if she was still the new bad guy of a new game, you could shortcut some of that information about when there's some discussion between whoever the main characters are, and then they end up discussing the fact there was an incident on this island that involved, Claire and Barry and all this sort of stuff, especially if it's BSA related.
Yeah.
That would have a report and understanding of what was happening and what her experiments were, and that she disappeared after those events, and she had, she's been suspected to be behind X and X events, but nothing has been confirmed. And then, of course, she becomes the main bad guy of this event, that whatever the game's around, and then the continuing antagonist going forward, basically becoming the new Spencer. She's trying to essentially surpass Spencer. There'd be a much more interesting narrative too from a villain's perspective, and it would keep us engaged on that. And then you could tie in the whole resurrection of Umbrella to that, but these are all elements that are not going to happen.
But that was, you just came up with the top of the head off your top of the head. That would have worked so much, very cohesively, and obviously that's been mentioned. And I don't think it would work with Natalex either. I think I'm not sure that would go. I want to bring in Sean, but I've got this from Lee Madden, and George, I'm very interested in your opinion on this. So a completely left field future game. What I'd love to, so Lee says, what I'd love to see is something that told the story about the investigations into the original murders leading up to RE1, or the Bravo team story, maybe a proper do-over of RE0, or a brand new game that progressed Ada's story. There needs to be something character-focused, anchored around world-building and lore. So, George, you kind of mentioned earlier, inadvertently in the podcast, something, a bit more focused, a bit more old school in that sense. Would you like to see something like that? Perhaps something I'm obviously in favour of forest in nighttime games, but something leading up to, a prequel?
Well, I mean, I went really far back with the Brandon Bailey reference, but something that always stuck in my mind when we were talking about this series, we talked in the past about the series represented in live action, and it always stuck in my mind. It was Batman that mentioned going back, kind of having sort of like something one step outside of the main narrative and looking at investigating those original Arkley murders, and maybe having an episode where you saw Wesker and how he was, in a sinister way was influencing, the RPD. I would love to see that. Yeah. And you could just, how far are you going to take that away from the main narrative? You could literally just have a story with those hikers. What if we had maybe something almost episodic in the way that Revelations was presented with the 4 episodes, and we had perhaps an episode that involved the hikers. I think the first
stuck in the forest somewhere. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. And then bloody Enrico completely sidesteps his main mission and suddenly goes after Billy Cohen. But that original mission to hunt through the forest and or the remnants of what happened to Alpha Team and Enrico, his journey to where we found him. I'd absolutely love to see that. And of course, we mentioned this before in the pre-record. The George Trevor tragedy, and just seeing the what really got me was that particular file between Lisa and Jessica, and how Lisa felt betrayed. When she thought that Jessica was going to make this escape that never transpired. So yeah, these individual tragedies that are told so well in the notes, the suicide note.
Sean, what about you then in terms of left field options? And you can bring this to as an opportunity to talk about some of the other lost narratives and plot points that you feel could be or perhaps should be addressed that we've mentioned already, maybe Ada or something like that.
It's really difficult. I mean, I don't want to see a prequel or anything like that. I don't want to go backwards because I feel the series has gone backwards too much with remakes and things like that. I want to move forward. The problem is they've blocked themselves into such a narrative that I don't know how to progress that. I agree with some of the listeners' comments that I don't know how to progress that in a way that's satisfying for everybody. I don't know how you can explore the horror angle if you're going to be dealing with the BSAA and it being essentially an army and soldiers and things like that. How do you construct a horror narrative around that kind of concept? It's very difficult. I don't know, Nick, that you've asked the impossible question, and that's the grand irony of where I sit in this series at the minute, because it's like I don't want to see remakes, but then if someone sits there and challenges me, well, what do you want from the series? It's like I don't know, because it's not an easy thing to define anymore. Resident Evil has explored so many avenues. I don't even know what Resident Evil is anymore.
Well, it's not even just that, Sean, because I fully agree. It's that fact that you can name elements of things that you would like to see. Like you could definitely say, I want more horror, but necessarily does that mean the plot, as you mentioning about like having the BSAA war, like that doesn't really inherently go to horror, as you said. So like you can have ideas of what you'd like to see, but narratively or connectively, does that make any sense in the current state?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know how to answer that. Which is why I'm always against the idea that fans know the narrative better, because a single fan with a great idea doesn't represent the fandom. When you get these people who say, fans should be in charge of the story, I cannot express how much I disagree with that. I am not in charge of what I think Resident Evil should be. I just want I want someone else to guide me through that story, and in that I just hope I can trust Capcom to explore the best avenue. One of the reasons why I don't feel the village ending will be explored in a satisfying way is because if you go back and watch was it a PlayStation Direct or a Capcom Direct? What was the showcase where RE9 was announced with the director of RE7?
Was that the same when they showed off the DLC as well for Village? I feel like that was the same.
I thought it was later than that, to be honest.
Maybe it was later than that. I'll go. Well, you're talking, Sean. I'll go look.
But yeah, the director of, I think it was 7, said he was, one of the reasons why there's been so much time passed is that he was just looking for the natural progression in his head of where would I take this series? And the fact that that wasn't natural to him after Village tells me that Village won't necessarily be followed upon.
It's interesting, yes, yeah.
It's kind of clear that they didn't really have an idea where they should go, and if you've got a situation where the RE7 director isn't even really sure himself until he had a light bulb moment where he goes, "Oh, I've got it. I've got the concept. I know where we're going to go, and I'm going to announce it in this video for a Capcom Direct or PlayStation Direct." It tells me that it might not be the answers that people necessarily expect. And so, if even Capcom didn't know, Nick, where they were going to take the series, I have no idea either. I just want to be a hapless viewer, excited where the series is going to go. But if it's a remake, I'm just going to be utterly floored. It was
July last year when they made the announcement for the next project.
Was it a PlayStation Direct then?
Was it that, or was it it might have been. I didn't actually look. I just looked at when the date was.
You do make a good point. You do make a good point, because I think it's very easy to say, "Oh, let's follow up with RE8." And it's not an incorrect answer, but you've got to think from a story point of view, you go, yeah, that's easily done. We'll head over to London and we'll walk into the BSAA. We'll have a nasty chat with whoever, and we'll see what happens. How do you then progress that into a game where you're going to randomly have BOWs in the middle of London? Why is there going to be an outbreak of some description? Why are you going to be going there knowing that they've got zombie soldiers and you don't, as I said, you don't bring, the army with you?
I actually have exclusive insider information. I've not revealed this to any of the guys on the podcast, guys. I've been leaked that the next game is going to be a courtroom narrative-based adventure. If you've played any of the Phoenix Wright games, then it's
what
right
it is.
up your alley, and it's going to be BSAA taken to court. And they're actually going to do a Phoenix Wright crossover. Like Miles Edgeworth is going to be the defender.
This just sounds like the sort of thing that would be in the opening cutscene when they say the BSAA were taken to court and dismissed.
RE9 is exclusively, I can reveal, a courtroom drama with speed lines and action sequences.
Yeah. To answer your question before, Sean, the announcement was at Capcom Next last summer, which is when they showcased Dead Rising Deluxe, Path of the Goddess, and they announced 7 on Resident Evil 7 on the iPhone, iPad, and Mac.
Okay.
Well, if Sean, if your RE9 courtroom simulator's a success, then I'm looking forward to the stock market simulator that is RE10, where we can replicate the downfall of Umbrella in real time.
Oh my god, that is a browser game in the waiting. That is, isn't it?
Absolutely, live from the FTSE 100.
Sell.
Concluding thoughts.
I think the crux of the podcast is, ladies and gentlemen, is despite our near 2-hour deliberations, none of us know.
None of us know. None of us know. And I wanted to end with Turtle Talk commenting this as a kind of general comment. So he says, and this will lead into our kind of concluding thoughts. Regarding the lore, I suspect Capcom are planning a new story, a new setting, detached from the Molded and the Winters. I suspect the reason we haven't heard anything in so long is because they're working on something either A, really innovative and new, as another reinvention of the series, discuss, or B, something massive in scope like RE6 was. I think the former, as I'd like to see a softish reboot of the series where the main characters are supporting players to whoever is new, but no longer take an active direct role. I'd like to see Alex Wesker and Ada followed up on, again something discussed. Maybe even some Hunk. We haven't mentioned Hunk, that's shocking. No. But honestly, I doubt any of that will happen, and they'll purely focus on something new. For the latter option, I'd like to see some kind of multiplayer, create a character, open world kind of game, like what we say in Street Fighter 6. Sean, you can comment on that. This sounds potentially terrible, but I think it could work really well if handled correctly. So a real kind of encompassing commentary there from Talk about what he'd like to see, what he thinks is going to go, and what could work. Sean, I don't get Street Fighter 6. I've never played it, but what's he referring to?
What do you mean? What don't you get about it, Nicholas?
Well, that's a beat 'em up, but the open. He's talking about the open world kind of game, like what was
making the
character.
talking
about the single player world tour mode. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talks about RE9 being an open world game, which, given the RE engine performance on open world games of late with Dragon's Dogma 2 and Monster Hunter Wilds, would give everyone cause for concern because the engine doesn't really cope very well with open world environments. But I digress. I don't know. I don't want to jump ahead too much with my following comment, but the
concluding comments now, Sean.
Okay. I've been forced to a close, ladies and gentlemen. Forced to a close.
Closing summary, people. Closing summary.
But yeah, to give you a slight preview into the next episode, talking about an open world game. I've been playing obviously RE4 OG in preparation for the next podcast. I found much preferred the streamlined experience versus the side questy, aimless almost direction of the remake. So I don't know whether that's necessarily the direction I want it to go. In terms of concluding comments, then I just want Capcom to guide me, guys. I trust them. I feel we're at a point where I can trust them. The only thing I question is the recalibration into pushing remakes more. And I wonder if that comes about because they've become so popular. not just with regards to this series, but with all series. It's like everywhere you go, you can't escape remasters, remakes, Tomb Raider remasters, Soul Reaver remasters, Resident Evil remakes. Dead Space remakes. Everywhere we look, there's remakes now, and I can't help but feel that not only did Capcom kind of start this with RE2 remake, but they've kind of contributed and pushed it as well by making a frankly too good RE4 remake. And I think this caused some kind of revisionist culture in the studio where they go, if all people want to play is remakes, why not give that to them? We'll put Resident Evil 9 on hold for a few years. We'll just give them more remakes because it's just a checkbook, isn't it? It's just going to make us money. And if that's the case, then it's kind of sad. And I've lost sight of what the original question was, Nicholas. We'll get back to it in a moment. But my concluding point about the situation that Resident Evil is in right now is that I'm pleased that it's had a break, because what a break allows Resident Evil to do is it allows it to rediscover itself again, but crucially it allows its rivals to rediscover themselves and lift themselves up as well, because I partially think that Resident Evil taking a break has allowed Silent Hill to rise, and in this hiatus that we're experiencing, the survival horror landscape has been invigorated by the rise of a frankly long missing medium, and I think the two now can coexist and support each other and help each other out. And if Resident Evil has gone far too much in the action in many ways, and Silent Hill looks to recapture the sort of Japanese horror aspects, certainly in the reveal that we've seen this week of Silent Hill F. So if they can contribute and coexist, then we're kind of in a weird way back in the early 2000s where everything was kind of cool for survival horror. And if we're going back to that, then I'm so excited for RE9. I really am. And my concluding comments is we're living in a landscape now where both Resident Evil and Silent Hill are doing really well. Please no more remakes. Come on, let's Silent Hill F has showed that brand new narratives can be really interesting. Let's go with that with Resident Evil. RE9, please be a brand new idea, brand new concept. Bring back some surviving characters, absolutely, but new game, please. Thank you very much. Rambled. On to the next person.
George, would you agree with that kind of optimistic, I would say, outlook? And hopeful praise of what could happen.
Had it not been for the reception and what Bloober Team did with the remake of Silent Hill 2, I wouldn't. I want the trailer for Resident Evil 9 to say thank you Bloober Team, Silent Hill 2, now hold my beer. I would just want Capcom to have that ambition, and they did it with 7. We never saw that. I certainly, Romby, maybe with the development knowledge would know more, but I never saw Capcom ever doing what they did with 7. In response to what happened with 6, and so I would just love to see them just something pure survival horror, completely new narrative. We spoke earlier about this writer whose name escapes me but has 07 in the end. He has numbers in his name. Someone please pronounce it for me. The writer of Silent Hill F, who was talking about Silent Hill, and it can be two things, not just a physical place but also a collection of signature themes. And that's what Resident Evil could be. I want to see with Resident Evil a collection of signature themes. So as long as it has those, it can do what 7 did and doesn't have to have anything to do with the narrative of what we've seen. It's so tired. I'm bored to tears with all of these, yes, beloved characters, but they've done everything that they can possibly do with this. And I think they tried that huge global thing. I want a grounded individual tragedy story, like perhaps we're seeing is going to happen with Silent Hill F, and you can attach the Resident Evil name to it because it's Capcom doing what they used to do best, pure survival horror.
Romby, what's your final thoughts on?
I mean,
where you think it's going to go?
I would just say, I think Sean's comment about basically his concept of the rising tide raises all ships kind of thing is very true. And inherently, when someone does something well and it sets a trend and everyone wants to emulate that, but it all raises the bar for everyone. It's and they succeed in doing so, it's great. And that's kind of the outcome that George is talking about in regards to the Silent Hill 2 remake. Inherently, I think he's also right. GT's also right in the sense that if looking from a development standpoint, the reaction of 7 was because of the mixed critical reaction to 6, and while it's continued to sell well critically, it's never been particularly the darling of the franchise, and I think that was a reassessment by Capcom, also along with the success of Revelations. The first Revelations, to go, we really need to probably look back at what Resident Evil was, and the horror elements are really missing. And inherently, if you feel like it's going too far from action, then it's a recourse to go, maybe the important focus for a new game is to always look at what horror means. Even if there is action in it, it still needs to be scary, and it needs to have that survival element. And inherently, that's probably the biggest goal that Capcom can tick, and that's something that even the remakes still do succeed in at various degrees themselves. So for what they are at certain points, so more of that is certainly something I would like to see of. I think we're in an era where we will see a continuation of remakes and a continuation of new games. I don't think it's a case where someone mentioned earlier in one of the comments from the Patreon group that they'll stall for time with more remakes. I don't think that's the case. I think there's been such a long development cycle on a new game that I am fairly confident that that's going to be the next thing that's announced, and then there will be more remakes announced in the anniversary year. What those remakes are will depends on whether or not you what you think they should be making, and whether or not you believe any rumors out there. I guess the simple truth of it is, at the very least, we know that more will come. That's not a question. Capcom is enjoying the sales and the success of this franchise, and it's continued to do so, and there won't be a lack of something coming at some point. We just don't know yet what it'll be, and hopefully it'll be something good.
I agree. My concluding thoughts. I think remakes are more palatable if we know we're getting regular new storylines being added to it. I'd like to see that happen as well. In an ideal world, I'd see remakes of games that really could do with one, in terms of something like Survivor or Dead Aim. I don't think that's ever going to happen. There's only a handful left of games which could be remade, and whether or not you feel they need to be remade is a different question. But for me, Resident Evil 9 is and I agree with the analysis that's been levied today. It could literally go anyway. It could go in the RE6 direction following RE5. It could go back to an RE2 remake situation in a new title. I would personally love that. I'd like RE9 be like Remake 2, albeit in a new setting. I'd be cautious as to how they're going to do it, but I think there is a huge amount of scope to really bring the horror elements back, and I'm quietly confident that they will. The reason being is that Capcom do know how to do horror very well. We saw it with RE7 throughout, but we also saw it in RE8 Village. It has the oppressive atmosphere of the village itself, I thought worked very well, but one of the most enduring legacies of Village will always be House Benevento. And I think Capcom know that. Although everyone kind of loves Lady Dimitrescu, and I think I saw something today, she's like the 4th most popular character searched on YouTube. She's like 4th. And I hope they don't follow on from that and use that. I hope they don't learn that is what was successful. That's successful for very different reasons. I'd like to think that they would look at something like why House Benevento was popular, why it was genuinely petrifying, and the fact that they did it again, albeit very differently, in the DLC is encouraging. I also think it's encouraging that they basically did the same thing again in Remake 4 with the with the statues. Those 3 moments were, for me, the best in those respective games. Whether that is a clue that they will follow that up in terms of that kind of style, I don't know, but it at least gives me a little bit of hope that they can do that and do that very well. But as I said, at the same time, they could easily go down the action route. They could easily follow up with RE8. I still can't think of a good reason why they wouldn't follow up with the BSA takedown investigation. But I can't think of how they could do it without it either being a repeat of Village, in the sense that you're kind of following up after Chris has already gone in, and therefore you're not playing as Chris. I think people want to play as Chris doing it, but that would inevitably lead to the action element. So, like Sean, I'm intrigued. I'm excited. I want to know what's going on next. I just hope they nail it. The past few years have shown that they've got the pedigree to do so. Let's keep it fingers crossed. See where we go from there. That does look into the 30th anniversary, 2025 RE9 remakes, spin-offs. Oh. Yeah, Survivor 5, please. That'd be nice. I hope everyone has enjoyed that discussion, and giving you some food for thought, and a big thank you to our patrons who provided some really good insight. Sorry, I couldn't mention everyone's. I mean, I think I mentioned everyone's who commented, but I couldn't mention everyone's in-depth discussion, so I kind of picked out the best bits. So thank you everyone for doing that. I greatly appreciate it. But now we turn our attention to a new edition of Neptune's Biohazard Quiz.
The ultimate test of Resident Evil knowledge returns. 100 podcasts later.
Jesus Christ. Any question, is that?
I'm getting a big fat 0 this week.
Yeah, I'm not going to get any of these.
I'm not going to say anything because I know that you'll just change the answer or something. Like, you don't even know what the answers are.
Can I just ask, have you had all of these questions independently verified?
And still things don't quite go to plan.
You only have to probably get it right.
Welcome to Neptune's Biohazard Quiz. Batman. Star Tyrants. George Trevor. Robbie McGregor. Mr. Spencer. Neptune's Biohazard Quiz.
So welcome, George. This is your first time in this series of the quiz, so a chance to get some points on the board. And with no Batman here to steal all your points, everyone, there's a good chance of success. Clear your internet, open up Notepad. Are we all ready? Here we go.
This just means GT's going to win this one.
Do you think he might?
When Bat's not here.
It's an
just he comes in, swoops in on the one episode he's been on for a while, clean sweep of the points, walks off again.
Well, I've been while you've all been playing Outbreak, I've just been revising.
Revising, excellent, brilliant. Question number 1 comes in from Anthony McCardle again, Patreon. His question is, what does Billy Cohen's tattoo say on his arm? A lovely tattoo on his arm. What does it say? Question number 2, what are the 4 swords used in Remake 4? So you've got to pick up 4 swords during your adventures. What are they if you examine them? Question number 3, what colour is D.I.J.'s diary? Question number 4, which weapon is described in the game as a gun to repel experimental animals? And finally, question number 5. Where do you find a bronze key etched with a club design? So where do you find a bronze key etched with a club design? They're the 5 questions. Join us after this.
By the way, why save Parker?
I have my reasons.
The BSAA isn't as useless as I thought. Things could really heat up.
Indeed. The fun's just getting started.
Welcome back to Neptune's Biohazard Quiz. Let's see how well everyone has done. What did we think? Okay questions this week, chaps?
I'm just over the moon. There was a question about Resident Evil 0.
Confident? Here we go. Question number 1 was, what does Billy Cohen's tattoo say on his arm? Stars Tyrant.
Mother Love. It's a Queen reference, I believe.
Mother Love. Romby, what did you put?
Yeah, Mother Love. Same thing as Sean. It's a Queen reference.
George Trevor, what did you
exactly
say?
The same. Yeah, Mother Love. It's a Queen reference. I think there's another Queen reference, isn't there?
Let Me Live jacket.
Let Me Live.
The Let Me Live jacket. That's it. Yeah.
Bonus question alert. Mother Love is from what album?
It's a Kind of Magic.
No.
That's the one.
Anyone know?
I don't know the names of any Queen albums.
Killer?
No. Rob?
Oh, is it Made in Heaven?
Yes.
There's another Resident Evil reference. I should have guessed.
You can hear the cogs turn, ladies and gentlemen.
Bonus point for Romby. Well done, sir.
I kind of alluded it to it, didn't I?
You did.
Like half a point?
No. Question number 2. What are the 4 swords in Remake 4? When you look at when you examine them, what are they? Romby, we'll start with you.
I couldn't remember at all. I've got no answer for this.
Oh, none.
None at all. I'm struggling. I was trying to think.
Okay, George Trevor?
No, I had no idea. I was hopeful, almost in my mind, thinking about remake. I was thinking about the different color keys in remake, but no idea.
Oh dear. Stars Tyrant.
I'm going to give it a go. Is it
Go on, then.
rusted, silver, gold, and steel or iron? I couldn't remember.
You are close, not quite. Oh, yes. So three correct. It's iron, rusted, golden, and bloodied. The bloody sword. 3 out of 4. I'm going to give you the point though. That was exceptional. Well done.
Considering the me and George did no concept whatsoever.
Yeah,
well done.
Thank you. I'll take that. Thank you.
That helped enormously. Question number 3, simple question. What colour is D.I.J.'s diary? George Trevor.
Well, I didn't catch the name of the person, but thank you again. Yeah, we got a Resident Evil 0 and a Code Veronica.
I know. Aren't I being
Brilliant.
generous?
And about a file, DIG's diary is red.
For red, Romby, what are you going for?
Red.
Stars Tyrant.
Red.
Correct. Points all around. Well done. Question number 4. Which weapon is described in the game as a gun to repel experimental animals? Stars Tyrant, we'll start with you for this one.
I honestly didn't know this, so I'll just go ahead and say the charged particle rifle. I don't know.
Ah, yes. Okay. Romby.
Spark shot.
Spark shot. Okay. George Trevor.
I had no idea. Just the kind of the language kind of sounds as a reference in an old Star Resident Evil file from one of the old games. So I was trying to think. I had no idea.
Points to Romby. It is the spark shots. Well done. But to be honest, though, I picked the question because there's lots of options. The charged particle rifle. I thought someone might have said linear launcher, maybe.
The file that is in question there, though, is that remake or OG?
This is OG. I don't think it's a file. I think it's
OG. Yeah. Fuck.
When you examine it, comes up.
It sounded
description.
It sounded like
And finally, question number 5. Where do you find a bronze key etched with the club designers in a pack of cards club? Romby?
Because it's weird, I have no idea. Can't remember.
You can be quite broad.
Yeah, still doesn't count me at all.
Doesn't help, okay. Stars Tyrant?
Outbreak at some point is the only thing I've got. I cannot pin the exact scenario, but I have no other answer, I'm afraid.
So Outbreak,
just Outbreak files, scenarios. Yeah,
I'm kind of looking for like a where would you know?
Oh, you're looking for a location? Oh god.
Yeah. Where
I'm like,
Oh god, the club key.
Yeah,
the club key. Oh, is that not in the sewage plant in RE2?
Is that what you're going for?
Yeah, guys, go for it.
Sewage plant, Resident Evil 2. George Trevor?
I was wondering if it had anything to do with the Resident Evil 2 remake. I've got no idea, and I'm club key. I'm going in the Stars office. I've got no idea. That's a guess and a really bad one as well.
Incorrect for both of you, I'm afraid. The answer was the monitor room on the Spencer Rain.
Oh my word!
Tricking you. You're supposed to be all confident on that answer, but you are. Sean, you are correct. It is.
Dead aim question as well.
I know, Sean, you are right. I think the club key is in the sewage, but the bronze club key,
the bronze one that was what threw me. Yeah,
is in the monitor room
as well.
Keys in RE2 aren't bronze, are they at all?
No, they're silver.
Yeah,
that's why I was like,
Nick, you bastard.
Yeah.
And there won't be another dead end question
for
like another 10 years.
I heard the bronze. I was like, meh.
Well done. Let's have a look at the final scores. And it's been relatively high scoring. This week's winner with an impressive 4 out of 6, I suppose, with a bonus question. Romby, congratulations, sir.
Thank you. I can only claim relief on that bonus question, really.
Second place with an impressive 3 out of 5 or 6, depending on your opinion, is Stars Tyrant there. Well done.
I do love how high scoring the rest of us get when Batman isn't in the mix. It's amazing.
And GT 2 out of 5. So not too shabby.
Well, I can't believe that there was a dead aim question, and I didn't even know it was about dead aim.
I know. Yeah. Well, I gave you all the questions you'd want, George. I gave a little help. Code Veronica, RE0, dead aim. What more do you want? Anyway, that does conclude the podcast. Join us next time where we'll have some more questions. So we are coming towards the end of episode 102. Up next, as we have alluded to already, we are going back to Southern Europe. We are going back to the natural birthplace and habitat of George Trevor, where he is at one with the bells. Yes, the bells you regularly hear in the podcast. From the church, we love a good church. We are going back to Southern Europe, and the Pueblo. It is Happy Birthday Resident Evil 4. It is 20 years old. If you can believe that, I can't. I still think it's a relatively new game, but it's not. It's 20 years old. So we are replaying Resident Evil 4. As Sean's already said, he's already started. He's that ahead, folks. But the plan is Resident Evil 4, beginning to end, in our usual Happy Birthday style. We're going to go through it probably at a brisker pace than other games.
I was going to say, happy birthday, going from start to end on a potentially 20-hour game is speed run chapters, exactly. Just not even sub-chapters, just like, all right, chapter 1. Not chapter 1.1.
Yeah, I think we'll have to do it quite rapidly, unless people want a 6-hour podcast. I personally don't want to edit that, but we'll see what we can.
It ends up being a part A and a part B, 2-3 hour ones.
Of course, the inherent problem with Resident Evil 4 is that it's only for GameCube. I know it wasn't. It came out on every platform going. Stars has already picked the OG version. So Sean, you're going to be playing. Well, you already started. You're playing GameCube version on a CRT with a nice gold-plated SCART. You're going to be our 20-year-old player looking back. Are you excited?
Am I allowed just to play? Well, to watch effectively the Resident Evil 3.5. Can we have a tiny little section on 3.5?
I don't think we can have time. Sean.
Yeah, I've literally, as of last night, completed the village section. We're moving into the castle, and it's not going to surprise anybody how I feel about it versus the remake. But playing on a CRT has opened a wealth of memories.
Excellent.
And I just wish everyone could own a CRT to play these games as they were originally intended, because it's an emotional experience, guys. I'm not going to lie. It's amazing.
We're going to look forward to your exploits. Romby, what version are you taking us through?
It's a good question. I need to figure this out. I haven't actually decided. I'm actually just thinking about this now because I'm literally staring right now at across from me. I'm looking at the PS3 disc version. There's a PS4 disc version on my shelf. In the other room, I've still got the GameCube version. I've got the PS2 jank. I've got access to the PC version, including the updated PC version. I mean, inherently, I've never played the PC version. I'm actually kind of thinking maybe I should play the PC version with the HD fan mods just to see, how that goes. I don't know. I've got to decide. I haven't decided. I'll give it.
If it helps, I think Batman's doing RE4 on the PS4 version.
Okay, well, I can cross that one off.
You can cross that one off.
Staring right across from me right now as I sit here.
We'll try and do different ones.
Include that one.
George Trevor, what version of RE4 are you going to be delving into?
Well,
beginning to end, it takes a while. I'm not looking forward to it. Sorry, folks.
It's interesting. It broke my heart. I absolutely fucking adore what's going on with 3.5, and that's what I wanted. But I cannot get away from just the memories. Sean talks about emotional. Just the memories and how much I did get out of that game. It's got such a great atmosphere. The palette, particularly, we've spoken about before. Maybe that's why it wasn't carried on into the remake. One of the favorite items in my Resident Evil item box is I've got the Asia physical copy edition of Biohazard Revival Selection. Where we've got that MT Framework HD remaster of Code Veronica, which is just wonderful. Please, I would try and play that if you can. The dynamic lighting when you're walking around with the light, because that's Code Veronica is a little bit dull. Sorry, I'm.
I don't disagree with the lighting, but the soft focus just throws me off. They didn't set the focal depths correctly, so.
So you're doing the PS3 version.
Well, on that HD Revival Selection, I think was this the first HD incarnation of Resident Evil 4? You've got a version of Resident Evil 4 on that disc, and it came out for PS3 and Xbox 360. So I can either play that edition on 360, or I've got the Wii edition that came out as well. That was like a HD kind of polish. I'll try with the Revival Selection. That one.
For me,
what are you doing, Nick? Yeah.
Well, you'll be pleased to know I've been able to source a Zebo. No, I haven't. For my sins, I'm going to be playing the Wii edition. I actually only own RE4 in GameCube and Wii variety, so my choices are limited. But I'm afraid as I hit 40 or get approached to 40, I find the Wii almost intolerable as a console. Not in terms of the motion controls, in terms of the IR blaster and actually having to hold the bloody controller up facing the screen the whole time. So that's my downfall. But I'm going to be Wii editioning it. In glorious
First world problems there, Nick. First world problems.
It really is. I sort of play a game and just like lay back on the sofa and just chill.
Well, if you had a different version of RE4 on a console with a wireless controller that didn't require a line of sight, you'd be all right with that.
I know it would, but this is what I do for the podcast. I endure sitting straight up 8 hours or whatnot playing RE4, but that'll be the plan. Yes, in glorious 480p on the Wii. We'll see how we get on with that, but that is the plan for the next one. That's going to take us a while to complete the game, so I recommend everyone starting, like Sean has, relatively soon and see if we can blast our way through that. So that is the next podcast, subject to any random Resident Evil 9 announcement, of course. And yeah, we look forward to celebrating 20 years of one of the most anticipated games of all time. On that note, it is goodbye for me, Neptune.
Goodbye for me, George Trevor.
Goodbye for me, Sars Tyrant.
And goodbye for me, Romby.
I'm writing the future, I'm writing it out loud. We don't talk about the past, we don't talk about the past now. So I'm writing the future, I'm leaving a key here. Something won't always be missing, you won't always feel empty.
We've decoded the intel from the Blue Umbrella spy, and it confirms the worst. Somehow, Wesker has returned.